Have you ever found yourself sitting in silence, yet feeling surrounded by noise, not the noise of traffic or chatter, but something more subtle, more persistent, the restless hum of your own thoughts? You're not alone. For many of us, this is the quiet struggle we face each day. A mind that never sleeps, worries that echo louder than any sound, and a lingering sense that peace is always just out of reach. We live in a world that worships motion. Productivity is praised. Distractions are endless, and stillness often feels like a forgotten language. We scroll, we race, we plan, we regret. In all that movement, something sacred gets left behind ourselves. But what if, underneath all that noise, there's something steady? What if stillness isn't something you have to earn or search for in a distant mountain retreat, but something that has always been with you, quietly waiting to be remembered? Let me tell you a simple story. There was once a man who carried his worries like stones in his pockets. Each day, he added more fear of failure, guilt from the past, anxiety for the future. One day, he wandered into a quiet forest, too tired to continue. As he sat beneath a tree, exhausted, a soft breeze touched his skin, and a bird called out from the distance. For a moment, he didn't think, he didn't worry, he just breathed. And in that breath, something shifted. The stones were still in his pockets, but they no longer felt so heavy. Maybe you've had such a moment, too brief, unexplainable, yet profound. A moment where you felt whole, even if just for a second. That is the doorway to everything this journey is about. What follows isn't a lecture. It isn't a list of rules or a promise to erase your pain. Instead, it's a gentle unfolding away of seeing that invites you back to yourself, back to the space within you that doesn't react, doesn't cling, doesn't judge. A space of pure presence. As we move together through these stories and reflections, you may begin to notice the difference between the noise in your head and the quiet truth beneath it. You may come to see that peace was never lost. It was simply buried beneath the thoughts you believed were you. So, if you're ready, let's begin not with striving, but with softening. Let's walk slowly into the present moment, guided not by urgency, but by curiosity. You're not broken. You're not too late. You're simply remembering something your soul has always known. There was once a man named Tien who lived alone in a small wooden cottage on the slope of a quiet hill, where the morning mist lingered on leaves and birds sang as if whispering forgotten truths. To those passing by, his life seemed tranquil, a poet's rhythm, a monk's pace, retreat from the noise of the world. But within those wooden walls, a different world stirred, a storm that lived not outside, but within the space of his mind. Each morning, as sunlight filtered gently through the window, Tien would open his eyes, and almost immediately, the voices would arrive, not from the room, not from outside, but from the deep recesses of thought. "You're wasting time," one would whisper. "You're falling behind," another would chime in. "What if you fail again? What if you never find your path?" They came without invitation, without pause. Some sounded anxious, others harsh, and some wore the mask of logic. But all of them had one thing in common. They never stopped. For years, Tien believed those voices. He didn't question their origin. He called them my thoughts. He let them shape his decisions, his self-worth, his entire inner world. If the thoughts were fearful, he became afraid. If they judged, he internalized the judgment. If they regretted, he was consumed. The quiet hill, the birds, the mist, none of it could soothe the noise that lived inside. He often wondered, why is it so loud in here when everything out there is so still? Then, one twilight evening, as orange light poured down the trees and wind rustled softly through bamboo leaves, Tien walked deeper into the forest than usual. He carried no intention, no destination. He simply walked. At some point, he stopped by a stream. The water flowed gently over smooth stones, singing a lullaby to no one in particular. He sat. He listened. For the first time in a long while. He didn't think. He didn't analyze the water. Didn't narrate its meaning. Didn't compare it to anything. He just noticed. In that quiet noticing, something shifted. He wasn't lost in thought. He wasn't reacting. He wasn't doing. He was simply there, fully, present, alive. That night, sitting in silence by candlelight, Tien asked a question that would change everything. If these thoughts can stop, even for a moment, then who am I when they are gone? It wasn't a question to answer, but one to feel. It echoed softly within him, like a bell that continues to ring long after it's been struck. He began to observe. Over the following days, Tien noticed how thoughts appeared on their own, like clouds drifting across the sky. Some brought rain. Some blocked the sun. Others were light and passing. But none of them stayed. None of them were permanent. They came and went, often without his consent, without his choice, and slowly. A profound truth emerged. He was not the thoughts. He was the sky they passed through. What a strange and liberating realization to see that the mind, which so often claims authority, is not the master, but a tool. To understand that just because a thought appears does not mean it is true. Just because it speaks in your voice does not mean it speaks for your soul. In Zen teachings, there is a phrase, "The mind is a wonderful servant but a terrible master." It points to this very insight. When we let the mind run unobserved, unchallenged, it builds a cage, and we live within it, mistaking the bars for boundaries of reality. But when we turn inward with clarity, we begin to see the mind as only one aspect of our being and not the deepest one. Try something with me now. Close your eyes for a moment. Wherever you are, let a thought arise. Don't chase it. Don't push it away. Simply notice it. Perhaps it says, "You're wasting time," or "You should be doing something else." Smile at it gently and ask, who is hearing this? Who is aware of this thought? When you ask that question sincerely, a gap appears, a spaciousness opens. It's subtle, but it's there, a silent watcher behind the noise. That watcher is not reactive. It doesn't rush. It doesn't cling. It simply sees. That is who you are. You are not the thought that says, "I am unworthy." You are the awareness that hears it and does not believe. You are not the inner voice that replays a past mistake. You are the space in which that memory is allowed to arise and dissolve. You are not even the thought, "I am spiritual," or "I am awake." You are the silence beneath both. Tien began to live differently. He still had thoughts, plenty of them. But now, he watched them like birds on a branch. He didn't feed them. He didn't fear them. Some days were easier than others. Some days the old patterns returned. But now he knew he was not lost in them. He could return again and again to that silent witnessing. He once wrote in his journal, "The mind is a storyteller. It tells tales of who I am, what I lack, and what I must fix. But the deepest part of me no longer listens like a child believing bedtime stories. It listens like a sky hearing thunder acknowledging the sound, but never shaken by it. You might wonder if I'm not my thoughts. Then what am I, that question? 2 is a door, and not all doors are meant to be opened by force. Some, you simply sit beside quietly until they open from within. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who sees them, the space in which they appear and pass. And when you stop clinging to each thought like it holds your identity, you begin to discover something far more spacious, far more peaceful, your true self, resting quietly behind the noise. Imagine you are sitting in a quiet room, alone, no distractions, no one speaking, no music playing, just you and the silence. Now, close your eyes. Within seconds, what begins to rise? A thought, then another, then a stream. Sometimes it's about your schedule, sometimes a regret, sometimes a fantasy, sometimes a fragment of a song you haven't heard in years. And before you know it, you're no longer in the quiet room, you're in your head, carried off by a river that flows whether you want it to or not. This is the automatic nature of the mind. Most people live this way every day, inhabiting not the present moment, but a world constructed by spontaneous thoughts that never asked permission to arrive. We are not thinking, we are being thought. And because this process is so constant, so subtle, and so familiar, we often mistake it as normal, as natural, as just the way things are. But what if this isn't the only way to live? There was a woman named Lean who worked in a small tea shop near the edge of a mountain village. She brewed oolong leaves with patience, serving each customer as if she were composing a poem. From the outside, she seemed calm, content, balanced. But inside, her mind was a whirlwind. Each time the bell above the door chimed, her thoughts jumped. Is this customer going to complain? Did I forget something? Will they like the tea? Even as her hands moved gracefully, her mind rehearsed future conversations, replayed yesterday's missteps, and anticipated tomorrow's unknowns. One afternoon, a traveling monk entered her shop. He wore a faded robe and a soft smile, and he sat for hours, drinking tea in silence. When he finally spoke, he asked her, "Do you ever notice how the kettle sings when no one listens to it?" She paused. She had never thought of it. The kettle had always been background noise to her busyness. The monk continued, "The mind is like a kettle. It will boil, whether you're watching it or not. But when you do watch, something changes, not in the kettle, but in you." Leon didn't understand then, but the words stayed with her. Over time, she began to observe her mind the same way she watched the kettle, without judgment, without expectation, simply noticing. She saw how her thoughts boiled over with no cause, how they rushed in even when nothing was wrong. A customer would smile, and her mind would still search for danger. a quiet day would come, and her thoughts would invent problems. She realized her mind wasn't reacting to reality. It was reacting to its own momentum, like a wheel that keeps spinning long after the push. That's the essence of automatic thinking. It doesn't wait for reality. It anticipates. It invents. It remembers. It imagines. It's a constant producer of mental content. And if we are unaware, we get swept away in the flow. We become passengers on a train with no destination. From a neurological perspective, this process is rooted in habit. The mind has built pathways, well-worn tracks of worry, criticism, planning, judging because they've been repeated so often. These thought patterns loop, not because they're helpful or true, but simply because they're familiar. The mind favors what it knows, but spiritual insight tells us just because a thought appears doesn't mean it must be believed. When Lian learned to pause, to gently label her thoughts, planning, worrying, judging, she began to disidentify from them. She stopped feeding the cycle. The thoughts still came, but they no longer consumed her. It's like watching someone knocking on your door. If you don't answer, they eventually stop. You see, the mind's automatic nature isn't the enemy. It's simply a function. Like the lungs breathe, the heart beats, the mind thinks. The problem only arises when we forget we are more than this function, when we believe every thought, follow every story, become every emotion. The great masters have always pointed toward this. In the Zen tradition, there's a story of a young monk who asked his teacher, "Master, my thoughts will not stop. What should I do?" The teacher replied, "Let them come, let them go. Just don't serve them tea." It's a simple teaching, but profound, to be aware of the movement of mind, and yet not get involved, not to resist, not to indulge, just to notice. This noticing is not passive. It is an active remembering of who you truly are, not the noise, but the awareness beneath it. Have you ever driven a car and realized you reached your destination without remembering how you got there? That's the automatic mind. It can function efficiently, but it lacks presence. It repeats patterns without awareness. But when you become the witness, you bring light into the darkness of habit. You interrupt the trance. Lian once told a friend, "My thoughts used to run ahead of me. Now I let them pass by, like children playing. I don't scold them. I don't follow them. I just let them be." This attitude is not indifference. It is compassion, to allow the mind to move without reacting to every twitch. To understand that the storm doesn't define the sky, and slowly, something beautiful happens. The gaps between thoughts widen. Silence becomes more familiar. You begin to sense a stillness that was always there, hidden beneath the layers of habit. The stillness is not empty. It's alive. It holds presence, clarity, and peace. When the mind loses its grip, the heart opens. In your own life, you might start by noticing one moment, perhaps in the shower, or waiting in traffic, or sipping tea. Ask yourself, what is my mind doing right now? Don't try to stop it. Just watch. The moment you ask, you're no longer trapped. You're the observer, the one who sees the pattern, not the pattern itself. And with practice, you'll begin to live more in that space, not constantly tugged by every impulse or memory, not enslaved by mental commentary, but rooted in something deeper, something that doesn't need to think in order to know. Leanne's tea shop became quieter, not because the world changed, but because she did. She no longer filled the silence with thoughts. She let the kettle sing. She let the breeze move through the open window without interpreting it. And in that simplicity, life became vivid again. This is the gift of understanding the automatic mind. It doesn't mean stopping thought. It means ceasing to mistake it for who you are. You are not the commentary. You are the consciousness. You are not the momentum. You are the moment. And that moment, this one right now, is enough. There is a moment, so subtle it often passes unnoticed, when your attention is gently pulled from the now and carried elsewhere. It starts so softly, a flicker, a whisper, a shift in focus. One instant, you're sitting in silence, breathing gently, perhaps feeling the weight of your body against the cushion. And the next, you're not. You're gone. Gone into a memory, a fantasy, a replay of a conversation, or a worry about something yet to come. You didn't decide to leave. The mind left for you, and like a leaf caught in a breeze, you were carried off without realizing it. This is the state of being pulled away by thoughts. It is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It is quiet, automatic, and constant. And because of this, we rarely notice it. We call it thinking, or daydreaming, or planning. But what it truly is, if we're honest, is being absent. Absent from life as it is, here and now. There was once a young man named Kai who sought guidance from a meditation teacher deep in the mountains. He had tried mindfulness many times, but always felt like a failure. "My mind keeps wandering," he said. "Every time I try to be present, I get distracted. I feel like I'm doing it wrong." The teacher smiled gently and handed Kai a cup of water. "Hold this," he said, "and carry it to the other side of the garden. Walk slowly, but with care. Do not spill." Kai nodded, gripping the cup carefully, stepping across the path with deliberate attention. When he returned, not a single drop had spilled. "Now," the teacher asked, "were you thinking of anything else while walking?" "No," Kai replied. "I was just focused on the cup." "Good," the teacher said. "That's presence." Kai's eyes lit up, but the teacher continued. "But now tell me what happens when your hands are empty again, when the cup is gone. Does your attention vanish too?" Kai fell silent, because he knew. The moment he wasn't holding something, his mind drifted back into the endless cycle of thoughts. And this is how most of us live present, only when there's something demanding our focus. But the rest of the time, we are somewhere else, carried by the stream. The mind is like a wild horse, without training. It runs in every direction. It chases fears, rehearses arguments, builds imaginary futures, revisits ancient hurts. It never asks if we want to go along. It just takes us. And so, we find ourselves living half-lives. Our body is here, but our mind is elsewhere. Our eyes are open, but we do not see. This split between the body and the mind creates a subtle suffering, a sense of disconnection. We feel out of sync with life. We feel tired, not because of what we do, but because of where our mind constantly pulls us. There's an old Zen story of a man being chased by a tiger. In his panic, He runs until he reaches the edge of a cliff. Desperate, he climbs down and holds onto a vine. Above him, the tiger. Below, sharp rocks. As he clings to the vine, he notices a single strawberry growing from the cliff's edge. He plucks it and eats. It is the sweetest strawberry he has ever tasted. This story isn't about fruit. It's about attention, about tasting this moment, even when life is uncertain, even when danger looms. But most of us, even in the calmest of times, cannot taste the strawberry because we are lost in the tigers of our mind. So how do we come back? The first step is simply noticing. Noticing that you've left, that your awareness has been pulled. Not judging, not blaming, just seeing. I am not here right now. This statement, said with honesty and kindness, is the beginning of return, because the very act of noticing you are lost is itself a sign of presence. Kai, in his later years, often said, I no longer fight the thoughts. I just smile when I catch myself wandering and say, ah, there I go again. Then I return. It's like drifting off during a conversation with someone you love. The moment you realize it, you come back. You don't scold yourself. You don't make it dramatic. You simply return with warmth and willingness. And each time you return, you strengthen the muscle of awareness. You train the wild horse of the mind to pause, to listen, to stay. Some people ask, why is the mind so powerful? Why does it pull me so easily? The answer is simple. It's been in control for a long time. From childhood, we've been trained to live in thought. School teaches thinking. Society praises productivity. Emotions are often dismissed or intellectualized. Rarely are we taught how to simply be. And so, the mind becomes our default mode. It narrates everything. It overlays meaning onto every moment. And because it speaks in our own voice, we believe it. But awareness is older than thought. It existed before your first memory. It is not made of words. It is made of silence, of presence, of attention. You've experienced this awareness before those fleeting moments of awe. Standing by the ocean, watching a child sleep, hearing a song that moves you. Time disappears. Thought pauses. Only this remains. Those moments are not accidents. They're glimpses, reminders of the life that is always waiting behind the veil of thinking. To live more in awareness is not to abandon thought, but to stop being dominated by it, to know when you've been pulled away, and to gently return. A woman once told me, "My mind is like a radio. I can't turn off." I asked her, "What if you didn't have to turn it off? What if you just didn't have to believe every song it plays? The mind will play its music. That's what it does. But you can choose to listen from a distance, with curiosity, rather than becoming lost in every lyric. There's no shame in wandering. The path is not about perfect presence. It's about returning, again and again, with love, and every return is a coming home. So, the next time you catch yourself pulled into a thought pause, take a breath. Feel the ground beneath you. Sense the air on your skin. Hear the sounds around you. Return, not as a punishment, but as a gift. You are not failing when your mind wanders. You are practicing when you come back. And slowly, moment by moment, You begin to live not just from thought, but from being, not just in reaction, but in relationship, not just as a mind thinking about life, but as a soul participating in it. This is the journey, not away from thought, but toward awareness. And in that awareness, life reveals its depth not in the plans, or the fears, or the imagined stories, but in the simple truth of now. You are already home. You've only forgotten the way. But each breath, each noticing, each return is the map. Why is it that we hold on so tightly to the thoughts that cause us suffering, even when we know a thought is painful, even when it keeps us restless at night or anxious throughout the day? We still return to it again and again. We rehearse conversations that never happened. We relive past mistakes as if doing so could rewrite them. We build imaginary futures out of fear or desire, and then believe in their reality so deeply that they begin to shape our present. Why? There was once a young woman named Mira who carried a small notebook everywhere she went. In it, she wrote down every troubling thought that passed through her mind. In case I forget, she'd say, in case I need to revisit it, just to make sense of it. Over time, the notebook grew thick with worries, doubts, questions without answers. It became both her burden and her comfort. She believed that by holding on to these thoughts, she was staying in control. One day, her teacher noticed her always scribbling in the corner after meditation and asked what she was writing. She handed him the notebook. He flipped through it silently and then said, "This book is heavy, not just in weight, but in your spirit. What if you didn't need to carry it anymore?" Mira looked startled. "But if I let go of these thoughts, how will I understand myself?" The teacher smiled gently. "You won't understand yourself by holding on to every storm. You'll understand yourself by learning to sit beneath the sky that holds them all." This conversation reveals something deep. We cling to thoughts not because they're always useful, but because we believe they define us. They give us a sense of identity, of continuity, of structure. Even painful thoughts can feel oddly safe because they are familiar. A person who was shamed as a child may grow up clinging to thoughts like, "I'm not good enough," or "I have to prove myself." These beliefs, though harmful, become part of the inner narrative. Letting them go can feel like erasing a part of who they are. It feels like stepping into the unknown, and the unknown, to the thinking mind, is terrifying. So we hold on, we repeat, we reinforce. Even when the repetition hurts, it offers a strange form of comfort, the comfort of what is known. But thoughts are not identities. They are not who we are. They are movements, ripples on the surface of consciousness. Some are rooted in memory. Some are echoes of things we were told. Others are just habit. They pass through like clouds. And yet, we build houses beneath them, thinking they will shelter us. To let go of thoughts feels risky because it challenges our sense of self. If I'm not the one who was wronged, or the one who failed, or the one who is always preparing for what might go wrong, then who am I? That question can feel like standing at the edge of a cliff, but it is also the beginning of freedom. In Buddhist teachings, there's a concept called upadana, often translated as clinging or attachment. It is the tendency of the mind to grasp, to take hold of thoughts, beliefs, emotions, identities, and claim them as me or mine. This clinging is seen as one of the key causes of suffering, not because the world is painful, but because we resist its impermanence. We want the mind to stay still, to hold one meaning, one story. But life doesn't work that way. The river flows, the seasons change, the body grows old, and the mind, too, is always moving. When we try to stop that movement by holding tightly to thoughts, we create tension, and that tension becomes the very thing that separates us from peace. So how do we soften our grip? The answer is not to force the thoughts away. That would only create more resistance. The answer is to begin seeing them clearly, gently, compassionately, to ask ourselves, when a thought appears, is this true? Is this useful? Is this kind? And most importantly, what happens? If I don't believe this thought right now? Mira once had a thought that returned often. You are not worthy of love. It came like a shadow, especially in moments of vulnerability. One day, instead of fighting it or writing it down, she sat quietly and whispered, I see you. I know you're just a thought. You don't define me. And something softened, not dramatically, not with fireworks, but quietly, like a knot that had been tied for years finally loosening. She began to see that the thought had power only because she gave it power. It wasn't a truth. It was a habit, a mental echo of old wounds. Letting go doesn't mean denying that pain exists. It means choosing not to carry it everywhere. It means recognizing that not every thought deserves your attention. That some thoughts are like stray dogs barking in the distance. You can hear them, but you don't have to invite them into your home. We also cling to thoughts because we think they'll protect us. If I keep worrying, maybe I can prevent something bad. If I keep analyzing, maybe I'll finally understand. But the truth is, the mind cannot control what life will bring. It can only prepare, and sometimes, even that is a fantasy. Real safety comes not from thinking more, but from being more, being present, being in the body, being with what is, even when what is feels uncertain. There's a saying in meditation, let everything come. Let everything go. Just don't let it carry you away. That is the practice. Not suppressing thoughts, not clinging to them, just letting them be and remembering who you are beyond them in time. Mira's notebook became thinner, not because she stopped thinking, but because she stopped needing to write it all down. She began to trust the space between thoughts. She began to feel safe in the stillness. She stopped needing to grasp every idea, every fear, every memory. She let them float like leaves on a stream. And in that letting go, something new appeared. Not another thought, but a feeling, a presence, a quiet joy that had nothing to do with solving anything. It was the joy of not needing to hold on. You might ask, how do I let go when the thought feels so real? And the answer is, you begin with curiosity. You don't force, you just ask. What would this moment feel like if I didn't believe this thought? You don't have to answer, just feel. Letting go is not erasing. It is remembering that you are more than the stories you've been told. It is not forgetting the past. It is choosing not to live in it. It is not becoming empty. It is becoming open. You are not your thoughts. You are the sky that holds them. And the sky never clings to the clouds. It lets them come. It lets them go. And in that, it remains whole. There is a presence within you that has never changed. It was there when you were a child, playing in the sun. It was there during your first heartbreak. It watched quietly as you made mistakes, fell down, stood up, succeeded, failed, laughed, and cried. It doesn't speak in words. It doesn't argue or explain, but it sees, always sees. This is the observer within. For many, this part of us goes unnoticed, hidden beneath the noise of thought, the tides of emotion, the constant narration of mind. But every so often, in a rare moment of quiet, perhaps in nature, during meditation, or when looking into the eyes of someone you love, you feel it, that silent watcher, that clear space. The observer doesn't judge, it doesn't analyze, it doesn't identify with what it sees. It simply witnesses thoughts, feelings, sensations all moving through. And when we begin to recognize it, not just conceptually, but through direct experience, everything starts to change. There was a man named Day who lived most of his life in reaction. If someone praised him, he felt high. If someone criticized him, he collapsed inward. His moods rose and fell like waves, depending on what life delivered. He identified with every thought. I am angry. I am afraid. I am right. I am broken. These weren't just passing feelings, they were his identity. One day, during a silent retreat, something unexpected happened. While sitting in meditation, Day became aware of a storm of thoughts, fears, old arguments, worries about the future, all swirling like a hurricane. But then, he noticed something else. There was a part of him that was not involved in the storm, a part that was just watching. He realized, I am not the storm. I am the sky it moves through. This insight didn't end his suffering immediately, but it gave him a new place to stand, a still point. And from there, he could meet his experiences with more space, more clarity, more compassion. Recognizing the observer within is not about becoming detached or aloof. It's not about suppressing emotion or avoiding pain. It's about expanding your awareness to include all that arises without becoming it. When anger appears, the mind says, I am angry, but the observer sees, anger is present. That small shift is everything. It creates a space between the sensation and the self. And in that space, there is freedom. Freedom to choose. Freedom to respond instead of react. Freedom to let go. You begin to see that emotions, like thoughts, are waves. They rise, they fall, and no matter how strong, they are always temporary. But the observer, it remains steady, silent, still. You've known this observer before. You've felt it when standing at the edge of the sea, watching the horizon. You felt it when holding a sleeping child. You felt it when everything around you is chaotic, but some part of you remains calm. That calmness, that awareness is who you truly are. In spiritual traditions, this observer has many names: the witness, the true self, pure awareness. But it doesn't need a name. It just is, ever present, even when unnoticed. When you begin to live from this space, something softens. You stop needing to fix every thought. You stop needing to control every feeling. You let the river flow, knowing you are the riverbed, not the current. This doesn't make life perfect, It makes it honest. You still face difficulty, but now you're not lost inside the experience. You're aware within it. Day, in the years that followed, still felt fear. He still had doubts, but he met them differently. He welcomed them like old visitors. He listened, and when they were ready, he let them leave, because he knew they weren't him. And you, too, can remember this truth. It's not about effort. It's about returning to the quiet space within that sees without judging, that holds without clinging, that loves without needing to fix. Close your eyes now, just for a moment. Notice what is present. Maybe a thought, maybe a tension in the body, maybe a breath. And then, ask gently, who is noticing this? Don't answer with words. Just feel the space the question opens. That space is your home. There's a gentle rhythm to presence. It doesn't demand. It doesn't force. It simply waits quietly, patiently beneath the surface of all things. Like the sun behind clouds, it never truly leaves. We just forget it's there. To return to presence is not to find something new, but to remember what has always been. It's a journey not forward, but inward, not toward achievement, but toward stillness. There was once a man named Arun who lived in a bustling city where every moment was measured, every second filled. His life was productive, efficient, and externally successful. But something in him always felt out of sync. A quiet ache, a vague sense of being scattered, like he was moving fast but going nowhere. One day, as he waited in line at a cafe, he noticed a small boy sitting by the window. The child was simply staring at the steam rising from a cup of hot chocolate, mesmerized. He wasn't fidgeting, wasn't on a device, wasn't impatient, just watching, fully there. Aaron felt something stir, a longing, maybe, or a memory. That night, he sat alone in his apartment. No music, no screens, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. He closed his eyes and tried to feel what it meant to be fully present. At first, his thoughts protested. They pulled him into tasks, reminders, unfinished conversations. But then something softened. He felt the warmth of the room, the texture of the air on his skin, the weight of his body on the couch. And in that quiet noticing, presence returned not as an idea, but as a reality. This is how it happens. Not all at once, not with fireworks, but with small moments of recognition, tiny openings, little pauses. Presence is not complicated. It's not mystical. It's simply what is. Before the mind begins to explain, it is the feeling of your feet on the ground, the sound of your own breath, the sight of light moving across the floor. It's the awareness of the moment without the overlay of judgment, memory, or expectation. Most of the time, we live in layers. We see not what's in front of us, but what our mind says about it. We eat while planning tomorrow. We walk while replaying yesterday. We speak while preparing our next response. And the present moment becomes a blur, a forgotten guest at the table of our attention. But presence has its own taste. When you truly inhabit it, everything becomes vivid. Colors feel richer, sounds more textured. Even ordinary things, a sip of water, a breeze against your cheek, becomes sacred. The return to presence is the return to life itself. So how do we return first? By stopping? Not forever, just for now. by interrupting the forward momentum, even for a breath, a conscious inhale, a gentle exhale, a moment to feel what it's like to be here. Second, by sensing, coming back into the body. The body doesn't live in the future or the past. It only lives in the now, when you feel the soles of your feet, the rise of your chest, the space around your hands. You are present. And third, by allowing, letting this moment be enough, not needing to change it, fix it, improve it, just letting it be and being with it. Aaron began practicing this throughout his day, not as a ritual, but as a remembering. While brushing his teeth, he would slow down and feel the motions. While washing dishes, he would listen to the water. While speaking to a friend, he would truly listen, not just wait to reply. And slowly, something began to shift. The ache of disconnection softened. The fog began to lift. Life didn't become easier, but it became more real. He was no longer living through his thoughts. He was living through his awareness. Presence doesn't solve all problems, but it transforms the way we relate to them. A stressful day feels different when met with presence. Sadness feels different. Even joy becomes deeper, quieter, less dependent on conditions. There is a story in the Zen tradition about a monk who was asked, "What is enlightenment?" He replied, "When I eat, I eat. When I walk, I walk. When I sleep, I sleep." The power of presence lies in its simplicity, to do one thing, fully, to be in the doing, rather than doing in order to be. But this return is not permanent. We forget, we drift, we get pulled again. That's okay. That's part of the rhythm. The practice is not to stay present forever. The practice is to return, again and again, with kindness, with gentleness, without shame. Every return is a sacred act, every breath a doorway, every moment a chance to begin again. Presence is not far, it's not hidden, it's right here, underneath the next breath, behind the next pause, and it's waiting for you to remember. Imagine a still lake at dawn. The surface is like polished glass, reflecting a sky painted in hues of lavender, peach, and silver around it. Trees stand like silent sentinels, their branches unmoving. The air is thick with quiet. You step forward, but not a sound of your foot reaches beyond the hush. For a moment, something unusual happens. Your thoughts pause. You don't think about yesterday. You don't worry about tomorrow. There is no analysis, no narrative, no plan, only the lake, the trees, the breath. And in that breath, you are fully, completely present. That is presence not as a theory, but as an experience. Presence is not something we achieve. It's something we uncover, like sunlight breaking through clouds. It's already there. But most days, our mental sky is overcast. The clouds of thought memories, to-do lists, projections, identities move quickly, covering everything. And so, we forget the clear space beneath them. To remember presence, we often need imagery, not to escape into fantasy, but to open a door into stillness, a door the mind will actually walk through. Imagine, now, that your attention is like a candle. When the room is calm, the flame burns steadily. But in a room full of wind of distractions, screens, noise, movement, the flame flickers, leans, and bends. It doesn't go out, but it's restless, fragile. That flame is your awareness. Now picture yourself sitting in the center of a circle of trees. They're tall, ancient, unmoving. You sit there, eyes closed, the wind passing softly around you. With each breath, you feel less like a person with a name and a story, and more like a presence resting in stillness. Nothing to defend, nothing to pursue, just being. Presence is that space. It is the absence of doing. It is the recognition that the world will continue spinning whether or not you are caught in its urgency. And in that recognition, you begin to feel your own center again. A man named Hiro once told a story. As a child, he would lie beneath a cherry blossom tree every spring. He would spend hours staring up, watching petals fall slowly like soft snow. He didn't know the word meditation. He didn't know anything about presence. But in those hours, he lived it. He said, there were no good thoughts or bad thoughts, just pink light and blue sky. And I felt like I belonged to something without needing to understand it. This is the paradox. Presence is simple, but our minds are not. Our minds are built for complexity, for fixing, improving, naming, controlling. That is their role. But presence asks us to release that role, just for a moment, to rest in the awareness that exists before thought, to be in direct relationship with life, not through interpretation, but through intimacy. Try this image. Imagine standing beneath a waterfall of golden light. This light doesn't push or pull. It just flows. And the moment you stop resisting, stop trying to label it, it begins to cleanse the weight of accumulated thought. Doubt melts, identity loosens, and you are simply bathed in what is, in practice. Presence often begins with the body, not abstract ideas, but sensations. The feel of feet against the ground, the breath moving in and out, the subtle sound of leaves brushing against each other. These are the gateways, but it is imagination that helps us open those gates with softness. Imagery calms the analytical mind by offering beauty, metaphor, and space. It creates a sacred pause, not because the image is real, but because it awakens what is. There was a teacher who asked his students to imagine their thoughts as butterflies. Don't chase them, he said. Don't trap them. Just watch as they land and take off. The mind is not a cage. It is a garden. This shift from struggle to observation is the essence of presence. We don't force silence. We invite it. We create conditions for it. And the imagery we use of gardens, skies, flames, rivers gives us language that the heart understands more deeply than words. A woman named Alina once shared a practice. Whenever she felt overwhelmed, she would close her eyes and imagine her heart as a vast ocean. Each worry was a small boat bobbing on the waves. They can float, she'd say, but they don't define the ocean. And that's what presence reveals. You are not the boats. You are the ocean, wide, deep, unmoved by passing vessels. In a world where we're taught to measure everything, presence cannot be measured. It doesn't produce outcomes or progress reports, but it transforms the quality of our experience. It slows time. It softens the edges. It brings clarity not by adding more, but by subtracting noise. Presence is also humble. It doesn't seek attention. It doesn't need to prove anything. It's there in the mundane the moment you sip tea, fold clothes, hear a bird, wash your face. It waits in the unnoticed corners of your life, like a friend who never left. And yet, we miss it, because we're trained to chase after things that sparkle, not things that still. But the stillness is where the soul drinks. Try this. Close your eyes. Picture a candle in the dark. Not a grand fire, just one small flame. Feel its warmth. Watch its steadiness. Now imagine your thoughts trying to disturb it. Whines of doubt, stress, memory. And imagine gently cupping your hands around the flame, shielding it, not fighting the wind, just protecting the light. That is presence, not control, just devotion to awareness. Presence doesn't mean you'll never think again. It means you won't be owned by every thought. You'll remember that you are the sky, and the thoughts are just weather. That knowing changes everything not by erasing pain, but by placing it in a greater space. And so, we return not to an ideal self, but to a felt self. Presence is not about escaping life. It's about meeting it fully. You are not lost. You are only distracted. And presence is the doorway back, not to a better you, but to a more honest you, one who breathes, who feels, who watches without needing to fix. And in that watching, something softens. And in that softening, something opens. And in that opening, something remembers. You were never far away. You were just waiting. There's a space, a subtle, sacred space between what happens and how we respond. Most of the time, we don't see it. We skip over it. Something occurs, and we react instantly, automatically, without awareness, like a spark meeting dry grass. The fire ignites before we even notice we're holding the match. But what if we could pause? What if we could step into that space, however briefly, and see clearly? This is the difference between presence and reaction. Reaction is fast, impulsive, driven by habit and conditioning. It comes from the past old wounds, old beliefs, old fears. Presence is slower, grounded, aware. It comes from now. It's the moment where consciousness meets the world without the filter of story. A woman named Sarah once shared how she would often lose her temper with her teenage son. He would leave dishes unwashed or speak with defiance, and before she could even think, her voice would rise, her chest would tighten, and the argument would begin. Later, she'd feel regret. "I wasn't even there," she said. "It's like something took over." And something did take over. Her patterns, her reactions, the residue of 1,000 unprocessed moments. But one evening, after a quiet walk alone, something changed. Her son, once again, rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath. She felt the familiar surge, but instead of speaking, she paused. Just one breath. Inhale. Exhale. And in that pause, she noticed something she'd never seen before. Her son's face wasn't angry. It was afraid. That pause gave her presence, and presence gave her clarity. Instead of reacting, she listened, and in that small shift, a new kind of relationship began. Reaction would have fought. Presence chose to understand. This is the quiet power of awareness. Not to suppress what we feel, but to witness it before becoming it. Imagine a storm approaching. You can either get swept away by the wind, or you can take shelter and watch the clouds pass. The storm is the situation. The shelter is your awareness. Most of us are never taught how to access this space. We grow up learning to react, reward, punishment, emotion, expression. We confuse immediacy with honesty. But presence isn't about delay. It's about depth. When we react, we act from the surface. When we respond from presence, we act from the center. Reaction is automatic. Presence is conscious. A monk named Lin once described it like this: when someone throws a stone into a pond, a reactive mind creates ripples. A present mind receives the stone and lets the water settle before deciding what to do. It's not about being passive. Presence doesn't mean we never speak, never act, never feel strongly. It means we don't let old patterns dictate today's truth. We respond to life as it is, not as we fear it to be, and that changes everything. Presence brings spaciousness. In spaciousness, emotions unfold more gently. Thoughts are seen more clearly. Words are chosen more carefully. We begin to live not from defense, but from connection. There's a story of a young boy who asked his grandfather why people shout when they're angry. The old man smiled and said, "Because their hearts are far apart, and they think shouting will bridge the distance." The boy asked, "What do we do when our hearts are close?" The grandfather replied, "Then we whisper." Presence is a whisper. In reaction, we try to control others. In presence, we understand ourselves. This practice isn't easy. It requires us to slow down in a world that prizes speed. It asks us to turn inward in a culture that looks outward. But with practice, it becomes natural. Start with the breath. The breath is always in the present. You cannot breathe in the past. You cannot breathe in the future. When you return to the breath, you return to now. Then notice the body. What sensations arise? What tension is there? Where does the reaction live? Does your chest tighten, your jaw clench, your stomach knot before the words come? There's always a signal. Presence learns to feel those signals, and in feeling them, we create space. Sarah began to do this every morning, just 5 minutes of sitting with her breath, her body, her awareness. Over time, she noticed the shift. Not that her son changed, but that her own energy no longer fed the fire. And when the fire stopped finding fuel, it stopped rising as high. She once said, "I thought I needed to fix him, but what I needed was to find me." That is the gift of presence. It brings you back to yourself. And from there, you can meet the world without armor, without scripts, without inherited reactions. Just awareness, just breath, just truth. There was once a village nestled between mountains where the sun rarely reached. Long shadows lived across the rooftops, and the people grew used to a life dimly lit. Lamps were always burning, fires always kindled. But even then, the corners of every home held darkness. And so, it became tradition to fear the dark, not because it harmed them, but because it was unknown. In this village lived a boy named Elan. He was curious, more so than most. While other children played in the daylight hours, Elan wandered into caves, peeked behind curtains, sat in silence under the trees when the sun began to set. He didn't mind the dark. He listened to it. One day, he came across an old man sitting on a stone near the edge of the woods. His name was Ciro, and he was said to be strange, someone who spoke little, but who had once traveled beyond the mountains. Elan asked him, "Why do people fear the dark?" Zero looked at the boy, smiled faintly, and said, "Because they forget that it is only the absence of light, but the shadow has no power of its own." The words puzzled Alan, "But it feels powerful. It makes us uneasy." Zero nodded. "Yes, because what is unseen grows in the mind, and the mind, when afraid, creates monsters." That evening, Alan sat by the river and watched the moon rise. It was soft, quiet, and pale. It did not chase the darkness away, it only lit a small part of it. And yet, even that light brought peace. This is where the story begins. For the shadow within us is much like the darkness of that village, misunderstood, feared, avoided. We fill our lives with noise, distractions, explanations, all in an effort to stay in the light. But there is something sacred about looking directly into the dark, not to fight it, not to fix it, but to understand it. Presence is the light. Not a spotlight, not a glare, but a gentle illumination. It reveals what already exists. It doesn't change the shadow, but it changes how we relate to the shadow. Ilan continued visiting Zero. Each time, the old man would tell him stories. One day, he lit a small oil lamp and placed it in a dark room. "Watch," he said. The flame glowed, flickering softly. The darkness didn't disappear. It simply shifted. The corners were still in shadow, but they no longer frightened Ilan. He could see them. Not fully, but enough, Zero said. The presence of light doesn't eliminate darkness, it transforms your relationship to it. And that is the heart of this teaching. You and I, we all carry shadows. Wounds unhealed, regrets unspoken, doubts, fears, judgments. These don't vanish by pretending they're not there. They don't dissolve through avoidance or denial. They soften only when we meet them with awareness. When you bring presence to fear, it becomes transparent. When you bring presence to shame, it begins to release. When you bring presence to anger, it starts to quiet, not because you forced it, but because you witnessed it. There's a story told in many spiritual traditions of a demon who appears in a temple. Every time someone tries to push it away, it grows bigger. The more the monks chant and fight, the more powerful it becomes. But when one monk walks up to the demon, bows, and says, "Welcome, friend," the demon begins to shrink until it vanishes. The shadow feeds on resistance, but presence feeds nothing. It allows, and in that allowance, something miraculous occurs: integration. Elon once asked Zero, "How do I know when I'm being present?" The old man replied, "When you can sit with your own sadness and not try to change it. When you can breathe with your fear and not judge it. When you can notice your own anger without needing to become it. Then you are present." Years passed. Alan grew older. He left the village, climbed the mountains, and saw the sun in its fullness. He learned that light was not something you held, it was something you are when you stop pretending. He returned one autumn, quiet and changed. The village was the same, cautious, flickering with low light, afraid to look into corners. But Alan didn't try to teach. He simply lived differently. When someone spoke harshly, he listened. When someone wept, he sat close. When someone shared joy, he smiled without needing to add anything. And slowly, others began to notice. Not because he preached, but because his presence soothed. It didn't push or pull. it aloud. Presence is not loud. It's not forceful. It's like the moonlight on a still pond, enough to see, enough to feel, enough to guide. There is a light within you, not the light of performance or approval, but the quiet light of attention. It doesn't promise answers. It promises intimacy. A closeness to life that doesn't flinch, doesn't fix, just witnesses. And that witnessing changes everything. You begin to see that the shadow was never your enemy. It was a part of you, waiting to be held, not healed like a disease, but embraced like a child, not corrected, but understood. Alan, years later, sat with a child much like he once was curious, quiet, unsure. The child asked, "Why do we have to look at the dark parts of ourselves?" Alan said. "Because only by knowing the dark can we know the depth of our own light." And so, the story of the light and the shadow continues, not as a battle, but as a dance where you don't have to choose one over the other. You only have to be present, to see clearly, to feel fully, to remember nothing in you needs to be hidden. Presence is not confined to temples or retreats. It doesn't require mountains or monasteries. It lives in the most ordinary moments, quiet, uncelebrated, easily overlooked. The texture of your shirt against your skin, the sound of boiling water, the way your fingers trace the edge of a cup without thinking. Presence is not something distant to be sought. It's something immediate to be noticed. Yet, most of us walk through our days as if half asleep. We perform tasks, fulfill duties, chase goals. We are surrounded by people, yet often disconnected, not because we don't care, but because our minds are elsewhere, reliving the past or predicting the future. Imagine walking through a garden while scrolling your phone. You're in the garden, but you don't see the garden. You don't feel the sunlight. Notice the fragrance of jasmine, or hear the soft hum of bees. That garden becomes a backdrop, not an experience. That is the cost of mindlessness. Presence is not about adding something to life. It's about returning to what's already here. There was once a woman named Anya who felt that something in her life was always missing. She had a good job, a kind partner, even time for hobbies. But at the end of each day, she would lie in bed with a strange emptiness, a feeling that she had lived through the hours, but not really lived in them. One morning, she decided to slow down, just for that day, instead of rushing her coffee. She watched the steam swirl upward, instead of checking emails immediately. She looked out the window and listened to birdsong. At lunch, she actually tasted her food, chewed, noticed texture, heard the crunch, felt the warmth of soup in her throat. Nothing spectacular happened that day. No miracles, no breakthroughs. But at night, as she lay in bed, she felt something different, completeness. Not because she had done more, but because she had been more. That is the quiet revolution of presence. You don't need a new schedule. You need a new way of seeing. You can practice presence while brushing your teeth. Feel the bristles against your gums. Notice the taste of the paste. Listen to the sound of the brush. These are not insignificant moments. They are life. And how you show up for them reveals how you show up for everything. Washing dishes can be a meditation. Folding clothes can be a prayer. Driving in traffic can be a sanctuary if you choose to be there. Rather than trying to get somewhere else, presence doesn't remove chaos. It reveals clarity within it. A young man named Kieran once said, "When I started practicing presence, I realized my life wasn't too fast. My attention was too scattered. Presence is not a technique. It is a remembering. Remembering that the breath is always available, that the body is always in the present, that every moment contains something sacred. If you're willing to stop and see, you don't need hours of silence. You need moments of sincerity, moments when you return to your feet on the ground, to the rise and fall of your chest, to the taste of food, the gaze of a child, the silence between words. Try this practice. Choose one activity today, just one, and do it fully. Drinking tea, walking to your car, turning on a lamp. For that moment, give your full attention, not because the activity is important, but because your awareness is. And watch what happens. Your heart begins to soften. The mind slows. A kind of joy arises not from excitement, but from intimacy. Life becomes less about what's next and more about what is. You begin to realize you don't have to chase peace. You just have to stop leaving it. There's a story of an old baker who had no formal training in meditation, but was deeply present. Every loaf of bread he made, he touched with devotion. He would say, "When I need the dough, I need the day. When I wait for it to rise, I practice patience. When I take it from the oven, I thank the fire." People said his bread tasted different, not because of ingredients, but because of presence. That's the energy you carry into your life when you're present. It changes your voice, your eyes, your touch. You become a place of rest for others, not because you fix them, but because your presence reminds them to come home to themselves. Children are natural at this. They don't analyze every second. They experience it. A puddle isn't just water, it's wonder. A stick isn't just a branch, it's a sword. A wand, a story. Presence returns us to that innocence, that openness, that nowness. But we must choose it, again and again, not as perfection, but as practice. And when we forget, which we will, we forgive and return. That is the rhythm forget. Remember, return in presence. You'll find that conversations become deeper, food becomes more satisfying, even silence becomes meaningful, not because the world changed, but because you did. You became here. You stopped resisting the moment. And in that surrender, you found belonging. There's a question that arrives in the quiet. Not during the rush of a busy day, not when the mind is full of plans or concerns, but in the stillness, perhaps early in the morning or late at night. This question arises softly, yet powerfully. Am I living, or am I simply being lived? It's not a question of philosophy, it's a question of presence. For many of us, life becomes a series of habits. We wake, we perform, we repeat. The mind leads us forward like a leash, dragging our attention through unfinished tasks, unspoken worries, unquestioned assumptions. We call it routine. But what if it's not routine? What if it's sleep? There's a subtle difference between doing life and being done by life. One moves from awareness, the other from automation. Imagine waking up in a house you don't recognize. You walk through the rooms, but nothing feels familiar. The furniture, the faces, even your own reflection feel like they belong to someone else. That's what unconscious living feels like. You're there, but not really. Your body moves, your mouth speaks, your calendar fills, but the you inside, he's somewhere far behind. There was a man named Thomas who once said, "I realized I had become a character in a play I didn't audition for." Every day, he put on the same suit, took the same train, said the same phrases. It wasn't that he hated his life. He just didn't feel it anymore. Then, one day, something broke the pattern. His train was delayed. He had to walk a few extra blocks. On the way, he noticed a woman sitting on a bench, laughing with her child, both of them chasing bubbles rising into the sunlight. Something about it, the pure, useless joy, stopped him. He didn't keep walking. He sat down. He watched. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something shift. A thought came. Maybe this is what life is, and everything else has just been a rehearsal. To live is to respond to life. To be lived is to react from conditioning. Presence draws a line between the two. When you're present, you taste your food, you hear the wind, you look into someone's eyes and actually see them. You make decisions not out of fear, but clarity. When you're being lived, your past decides for you. Your fears shape your yes and your no. You run, not knowing what chases you. You chase, not knowing what you're hoping to catch. Ask yourself gently, when was the last time I paused before reacting? When was the last time I changed a habit? Not because I should, but because I noticed living means you notice. Being lived means you numb. But it's not your fault. This world is designed to distract, to consume your attention before you've even had a chance to give it to yourself. But still, there are moments. A sudden sunset that stops you mid-sentence, a song on the radio that takes you back to childhood, the scent of earth after rain. These moments are not coincidences. They are invitations, reminders, brief cracks in the shell of unconsciousness. And through those cracks, the light of awareness begins to shine. There's a story in a Zen tradition. A young student asked his master, "How do I wake up?" The master smiled and said, "By noticing the moment you've fallen asleep, you don't need to change everything. You just need to notice something. Notice when your body is tight. Notice when your breath is shallow. Notice when your words are automatic. In that noticing, a gap appears. In that gap, a choice is born. And in that choice, life returns." Tomas began to carry a stone in his pocket, not for luck, but as an anchor. Every time he touched it, he would ask himself, right now, am I living or am I being lived? It wasn't about guilt. It was about awakening. That question became a compass. Presence doesn't ask you to escape your life. It asks you to enter it fully, to feel when you're eating, to breathe when you're speaking, to return when you've wandered. This isn't a one-time shift. It's a lifelong return. Again and again. Back to this moment. Back to yourself. Back to now. Because now is the only place life ever happens. Close your eyes. Don't try to change anything. Just notice your body is already breathing. The inhale comes. The exhale leaves. Without effort. Without instruction. Like waves on the shore. The breath arrives and departs. Over and over. Whispering a single truth: you are alive. Before thought, before language, before memory, there is breath. And where there is breath, there is presence. We often think of the breath as something secondary, automatic, unnoticed, irrelevant unless it's lost. But in truth, the breath is the most intimate companion you have. It has been with you since the first cry at birth. It will remain with you until your final sigh. In between, it holds the key to presence, not because it's magical, but because it's now. You cannot breathe for the past. You cannot breathe for the future. You can only breathe here. And the body, this vessel of sensation, tension, temperature is your anchor. It doesn't lie. It doesn't live in illusion. The mind may wander into stories, judgments, plans, but the body always tells the truth. A woman named Lyra once described how she began her mornings not with news or coffee, but with breath. She would lie still for 2 minutes, simply feeling the rise and fall of her chest, noticing the weight of the blanket, the softness of her skin against the pillow, the way the air felt in her nose. At first, it felt unnecessary, almost too simple. But slowly, she began to notice something. Her anxiety began to lessen. Her thoughts became more spacious. Her interactions softer. It wasn't the silence that changed her. It was the noticing. Sensing the body brings you out of the mind and into the moment. Try it now. Feel the soles of your feet. Feel the air against your arms. Is there tightness in your jaw? Softness in your belly? Can you sense your heartbeat? Not imagine it, but feel it. These small returns create a thread of presence through your day. Each breath, each sensation, each noticing becomes a stitch in the fabric of awareness. When we are disconnected from the body, we live in our heads, spinning, rushing, analyzing. But when we return to the body, we return to now. The breath doesn't ask for anything. It doesn't demand change. It offers presence through simplicity. There's an old teaching. When the breath is shallow, the mind is restless. When the breath is deep, the heart is calm. And so, we begin there, not with control, but with attention, not with goals, but with openness, because the breath, when observed, becomes a doorway, and the body, when sensed, becomes a home, not a perfect home, but a living one that aches, heals, stumbles, carries, and most importantly feels. In feeling, we become real again. In sensing, we become present. Meditation is often imagined as a person sitting cross-legged in silence, eyes closed, hands resting gently on their knees, a serene expression on their face. This image, repeated across books, films, and teachings, has become the symbol of inner peace. And while there is truth in it, the image is not the whole story. Meditation is not about the posture. It's about the presence. It's not about stillness of the body. It's about stillness within the moment. To believe meditation happens only in silence, and seclusion is to miss its real invitation to bring awareness into everything. A woman named Maya once struggled with sitting practice. Her legs would go numb. Her mind would race. She felt like a failure. I'm just not built for meditation, she told her teacher. He smiled gently and said, "Then stop trying to meditate. Just wash the dishes." She was confused. That's meditation. Only if you feel the water, hear the clink of the bowls, Notice your breath as you move. If you're present, then yes, that is meditation. So she tried. That night, she washed the dishes slowly, noticing the warmth of the water, the slipperiness of soap, the rhythm of her movements. And something shifted, not dramatically, but subtly. She didn't feel distant from herself anymore. She felt with herself. This is the doorway. Meditation begins not with silence, but with sincerity. You can meditate while walking through a crowded street, while drinking tea, while tying your shoes. The form doesn't matter. The quality of attention does. Meditation is not escape. It is entrance. Entrance into the present moment, as it is not as we wish it to be. In monasteries across Asia, monks sweep leaves every morning, not because the courtyard must always be clean, but because sweeping is the practice. Every motion, every step, every breath an opportunity to return to presence. There's a Zen saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The tasks don't change. The awareness does. Meditation isn't separate from life. It is life lived with presence. Imagine folding laundry. Most of the time, it's a chore, something to finish, a task on a list. But now, imagine feeling the fabric in your hands, the sound of the folds, the colors, the textures, the rhythm, your breath steady, your attention soft. What changes not the laundry? You stop rushing. You start being. Maya began to meditate while walking, while brushing her hair, while waiting in line, not as an effort, but as an invitation. Can I be here? Too, she would ask herself. And with time, she discovered that meditation wasn't something she did. It was a way of being, a way of relating to each moment, not through judgment, but through awareness, not through control, but through presence. This shift is subtle but profound. When you stop limiting meditation to the cushion, your whole life becomes sacred ground. The traffic jam becomes a lesson in patience. The crying baby becomes a lesson in surrender. The difficult conversation becomes a lesson in presence under pressure. Every moment, a mirror. Every breath, a bell. This doesn't mean every moment feels peaceful, but every moment becomes accessible to awareness. And in that accessibility, you find freedom not from pain, but from unconsciousness. That's the real purpose of meditation, not to escape life's noise, but to hear it clearly without being consumed by it. To return, again and again, to the only place you've ever truly lived here. So, whether you sit or walk, speak or listen, move or rest, meditate, not with effort, but with presence. There's a quiet truth whispered across all wisdom. Tradition's suffering is not caused by life itself, but by how tightly we hold on to it. The rain does not hurt us. It's our resistance to being wet. The change is not the problem. It's our refusal to let go. The mind clings, and in that clinging, suffering begins, not because we are bad or broken, but because we forget the nature of things. We try to hold what is always moving. We try to freeze what is meant to flow. A monk once held a cup before his students. He said, "This cup is already broken." They looked at him, confused. The cup was whole, flawless. He smiled and continued, "To use it with the awareness that it will one day shatter is to use it with love." not fear. Clinging begins when we believe anything is permanent. We cling to identities. I am this kind of person. I must be seen this way. But the self is not a statue. It's a river, always changing, always flowing. To grip a river is to lose it. We cling to people, wanting them to stay the same, wanting them to never leave. But they too are rivers growing, moving, fading, returning. Love becomes suffering when it becomes possession. We cling to feelings, wanting joy to last forever, wanting pain to disappear now. But both are waves. They rise, they fall, they never stay. And so the suffering isn't in the wave, it's in the holding. Imagine standing on a beach, trying to grasp each wave with your hands. The tighter you try, the more exhausted you become. But when you let them wash over you, you realize the water is not the enemy. It's your resistance that drowns you. Tenzin, a woman in her 60s, once shared a story. Her husband had passed away, suddenly. She spent months in deep grief, but underneath the grief was something deeper, resentment, not just at life, but at herself. I was clinging to who he was, to how things were. I couldn't accept that something so beautiful could end. She began to meditate, not to escape the grief, but to sit with it. And over time, she noticed something. Her suffering didn't come from his death alone. It came from her refusal to let it be true. I thought letting go meant forgetting. She said, but it actually meant remembering without holding. That's the paradox of clinging. The more we try to hold on to something, the more it slips through our hands. But when we soften, when we allow, we begin to feel fully again, not just the pain, but the love beneath it. Clinging hardens us. Presence softens us. And in that softness, life becomes bearable again. Clinging shows up in thoughts, replaying old conversations, fantasizing outcomes, regretting choices, worrying about futures. The mind grabs and grabs, trying to control what it cannot. Presence, instead, breathes. It sees the thought, nods gently, and returns to now. You don't need to banish your thoughts. Just stop gripping them. Like birds flying across the sky, notice, then let them pass. This is not passivity, it's wisdom. Knowing what to hold and what to release is an art, and suffering teaches us where our grip is too tight. Start small. Notice where your shoulders clench, where your breath shortens, where your voice rises. Ask, what am I holding right now? And then breathe. Let the moment be what it is. Let the person be who they are. Let yourself be human. Tenzin once said. The grief didn't leave, but the suffering softened, and that made room for love to stay. You don't lose things by letting go. You lose them by clinging too tightly. Let the mind unclench. Let the heart open. And in that opening, you'll find peace, not because nothing hurts, but because you're no longer fighting what is. You're breathing with it, living with it, and finally, free within it. Two monks, Tenzin and Kido, were walking along a muddy road after a long rain. They were on a pilgrimage through remote villages, traveling by foot with only robes and a begging bowl. The road was difficult, slippery, with puddles at every step. As they approached a small village, they saw a young woman standing beside a deep patch of mud. She wore fine robes, clearly unused to the rough terrain. The muddy path was impassable for her without soiling her clothing. As the monks neared, she looked at them with a mixture of hope and hesitation. Tenzin, without a word, stepped forward, lifted her gently in his arms, and carried her across the mud. He placed her down safely on dry ground, bowed slightly, and continued walking. Kido, however, said nothing but grew visibly tense. He followed silently, his brow furrowed, his steps heavier. After several hours of walking in silence, Kido finally spoke. "We monks should not touch women," he said, his voice tinged with judgment. "Why did you carry her?" Tenzin looked at him calmly and replied, "I put her down hours ago." Why are you still carrying her? This story has echoed through Zen teachings for centuries. It is deceptively simple, but it reveals a powerful truth. What we carry in the mind weighs more than anything the body ever could. Tenzin carried the girl for only a few seconds. Kido carried her for hours without even touching her. He carried judgment. He carried attachment to rules. He carried the illusion of purity. He carried a story. This is what the mind does. We move through life, encountering moments, people, situations. Some of them pass quickly, but instead of letting them go, we hold on. We replay the conversation. We analyze the insult. We regret the mistake. We clutch our righteousness. We carry the past into the present and then wonder why we feel so heavy. But the burden is not in the moment. It's in the mind's refusal to let it go. Tenzin shows us what it means to live from presence, to meet life as it comes, to respond with clarity, to act with compassion, and then to release. Kido shows us what happens when we live from concepts, from rigid belief, from clinging to how things should be. Presence is not bound by form. It's not about strict rules. It's about wise response, compassionate response, and most importantly, liberated response. The path of awareness is not about perfection. It's about freedom. Freedom from the voices in our head that tell us we failed. Freedom from the identities we protect so fiercely. Freedom from the need to be right. Freedom from the past we can't seem to stop replaying. When we carry less in the mind, we walk lighter in the world. Imagine every unprocessed memory as a stone in your backpack. Each resentment, each guilt, each fixation. Over time, the weight builds. You forget what it's like to move freely. You believe heaviness is normal, but it's not. You can put the bag down. Tenzin put it down. He acted, then released. He didn't justify. He didn't apologize. He didn't cling. He trusted the moment, then returned to now. That is meditation in action. We often think mindfulness is about stillness, but it's more about release, letting go of the second arrow, the one we shoot at ourselves. Kido's discomfort wasn't caused by the woman. It was caused by his thoughts about what had happened. And that's how suffering usually arises, not from life itself, but from the mental residue we refuse to release. Ask yourself, what am I still carrying? A conversation from last week, a mistake from last year, a role someone expects me to play. Breathe into that. Then ask, what if I put it down? Not ignore it, not suppress it, but set it down with awareness, with breath, with kindness. Tenzin didn't reject the woman. He didn't fear the rules. He responded to the need of the moment. That is the balance between wisdom and compassion. Awareness without love becomes cold. Compassion without clarity becomes attachment. together. They free us. And freedom is the true path of meditation, not to withdraw from life, but to walk through it without burden, to meet each moment fully, to carry what's needed, and then to let go. Meditation is not limited to a cushion or a quiet room. It is not a posture or a practice confined to a sacred hour. It is, at its essence, the art of being present wherever you are, whatever you are doing. And some of the most powerful meditations happen not in stillness, but in motion. To walk and to eat, these are some of the most ordinary acts. So ordinary, in fact, that we rarely pay attention to them. We walk to get somewhere. We eat to finish. These actions have become means to an end. But what if they could be doorways? Doorways to stillness, to presence, to the very center of life. Let us begin with walking. There is a way of walking where every step is a return to yourself, to your breath, to the earth beneath you. Not rushing, not analyzing, just stepping mindfully, slowly, deliberately. A teacher once told a student, "When you walk, just walk." Simple, but profound, because most of us do not just walk. We walk while thinking, while checking our phones, while planning the future or reliving the past. Meditation and walking means walk with your feet, your breath, and your awareness. Try this. Find a quiet place, a hallway, a garden path, even a few meters in your room. Begin walking slowly. Feel the sole of your foot touch the ground. Feel it lift. Notice the weight shift. Breathe gently. Eyes soft, not fixed. Thoughts may come, let them, but return, again and again, to the step, breath, presence. One woman, Helena, shared how she began practicing walking meditation on her commute instead of rushing from her car to the office. She left 10 minutes earlier and walked with attention. I started hearing birds I never noticed. I felt the wind. I began arriving at work, not just physically, but emotionally calm. In each step, there is a chance to release tension, to return home. Some monks say that when they walk, they imagine kissing the earth with their feet, each contact a gesture of reverence, of gratitude, of belonging. You don't have to walk in silence to be meditative. You simply have to walk in presence. Now let us move to eating. Eating, like walking, is often done unconsciously. We eat while distracted. We scroll our phones, we talk, we rush. Food becomes fuel consumed, not experienced. But food is sacred. It is the earth's gift, the labor of many hands, the miracle of transformation from soil to sustenance. To eat mindfully is to return to this miracle. Begin by pausing before you eat. Look at your food, smell it. Feel gratitude for the ingredients, the people who grew and prepared it, the body that will receive it. Then, take one bite, chew slowly, feel the texture, notice the taste, not just the flavor, but the nuances, the warmth, the spice, the sweetness. Swallow with awareness. Take a breath, then another bite. This is not about slowness for its own sake. It's about connection. A young man named Raphael struggled with overeating. No diet helped. Then he tried mindful eating, not as a method to lose weight, but as a way to understand his relationship with food. For the first time, I realized how often I eat out of emotion, not hunger. He said, "Mindful eating taught me to taste not just the food, but my own feelings. To meditate while eating is to nourish not just the body, but the soul. You don't need candles or mantras. You need attention. You need to be there. Walking and eating are daily rituals, but in presence, they become sacred. They remind us that life is not just in the grand gestures, but in the small ones, the steps, the bites, the breaths. And that meditation is not a separation from life. It is a deeper meeting with it. So next time you walk with your heart. Next time you eat with your whole being. And in that simple shift, you'll find something extraordinary. You were never far from peace. You were just not walking with it. Meditation, in its essence, is simple. The art of being present with what is, and yet, around this simplicity, so many misconceptions have grown layers of expectation, confusion, and fear. These misunderstandings often become silent walls, keeping people from a practice that was meant to liberate, not intimidate. One of the most common misconceptions is this: meditation means emptying the mind. People imagine a monk sitting on a mountain, completely thoughtless, bathed in bliss. And so, when they sit and encounter a flood of thoughts, they assume they're doing it wrong. But the truth is, the mind thinks that's what it does. Trying to stop thoughts is like trying to stop the wind. Meditation isn't about eliminating thought. It's about relating to thought differently. Imagine sitting by a river, watching leaves float by. Each thought is a leaf. You don't chase it. You don't dive in. You simply watch it pass. That is meditation. Presence doesn't demand silence in the mind. It invites softness in your awareness. Another misconception: you have to sit in a perfect posture. Many people avoid meditation because they think it requires sitting cross-legged on the floor for an hour. But meditation is not about position. It's about presence. You can sit in a chair, lie down, stand, walk. The body is a doorway, not a prison. Tenzin, a woman in her 70s, practiced meditation while knitting. Each stitch was a breath, each loop a mantra. Her hands moved, but her mind stilled. I found stillness in motion. She said, meditation meets you where you are not where a book says you should be. A third myth: meditation should feel peaceful. While it can bring peace, it can also bring discomfort. When you slow down, you begin to hear what's underneath the noise: grief, fear, restlessness. This isn't failure, it's truth rising. To meditate is to create space for all of you, not just the calm parts. A man named Elias shared, "The first time I sat in silence, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I realized how long I had been running. Meditation is not an escape, it's an arrival." Another misconception: you need to meditate for a long time for it to work. But presence doesn't measure time. One sincere breath, fully felt, can shift your whole day. Begin with 1 minute, 1 breath, 1 pause before you speak. That is meditation. There's also a belief that meditation is for spiritual people. But meditation is not a religion. It's a relationship with yourself, with the moment, with life. You don't need robes or chants. You need willingness. Willingness to meet yourself with honesty. Willingness to be here. Presence is not reserved for monasteries. It belongs in kitchens, offices, buses, wherever there is breath, there can be meditation, another common trap. If I'm not calm, I'm failing. But the goal is not calm. The goal is awareness. Sometimes the breath is smooth. Sometimes it's tight. Sometimes the heart feels open. Sometimes it aches. All of it is welcome. Meditation is not performance. It's permission to be as you are. There's also fear. If I meditate, I'll lose my edge. Some believe presence will make them passive, but presence does not dull you. It sharpens you. It helps you respond, not react. It brings clarity, not confusion. It connects you to your deepest strength, the one that's not built on tension, but rooted in knowing. And lastly, I tried it once. It didn't work. But meditation is not a pill. It's not a quick fix. It's a practice, a remembering, a returning, over and over, even when it feels messy, especially when it feels messy, because that's when presence is most needed. So, let go of the myths, let go of the pressure, let the practice be what it is, a gentle returning to breath, to body, to this moment. That is enough. You are enough. Imagine waking up and, just for today, you let go. You wake without reaching for your phone. No emails, no messages, no news to pull your mind away before your body even rises. You lie there and simply breathe. Not because it's a practice, but because it's what's real. Inhale, exhale. The morning light washes across the walls. There's no hurry, no story, just you. And now, you step out of bed with bare feet on cool floor. There's no rush to fix, to analyze, to become. You are already here. You are already enough. A day without attachment of the mind begins with a breath and a choice. The choice not to cling, not to grab hold of thought as truth, not to chase every feeling as if it defines you. You walk to the kitchen and make tea. The steam rises, soft and alive. You don't need to be anywhere else. You don't need to be anyone else. You hold the cup with both hands and feel its warmth. There is no thought saying, "This isn't enough." There is just tea. Breakfast is simple. Toast. Perhaps fruit. You chew slowly. You taste. Rather than scroll, you notice your hunger, your fullness, your presence. You are not what you eat. You are the awareness that meets each bite. Later, someone interrupts your peace, a sharp word, a judgment, a misunderstanding. Normally, the mind would react, build a wall, or a wound. But today, you pause. You feel the rise of emotion, but you don't identify. You let it pass like wind. You don't deny the pain. You just don't become it. You breathe. You remember, this is their storm. I don't have to enter it. And so, you stay anchored. The rest of the day unfolds with simple beauty. You notice the curve of clouds, the way sunlight dances on your desk. You work, but without the narrative of pressure. You respond to needs, but without losing yourself in them. Thoughts come. Of course, they do. Memories, plans, insecurities, but you see them as visitors, not truths. You bow to each one, then let it pass. There is no war in your mind because you are not trying to control it. You are simply observing. And that observation is freedom. At lunch, you eat slowly again. You laugh at something small. You feel the way your belly softens when you're at ease. You don't grip the joy. You let it move through you like music. The afternoon brings fatigue. You don't fight it. You rest. You don't label it as laziness or failure. You honor the body's whisper. You walk outside. You feel the wind, not as air, but as a presence. You see people pass by, each one with stories, dreams, burdens. You don't compare. You don't judge. You simply see. You realize you're not separate. You are not above. You are not below. You are with. A small worry arises about tomorrow, about something undone. You notice the tension in your chest, and again, you choose not to hold it. You say softly, "This too is a wave," and you let it pass. Evening comes. You light a candle, not as ritual, but as reminder that light is always possible. Dinner's quiet. No drama. No noise. Just nourishment. Just now. Before sleep, you sit for a few moments, not to achieve anything, but to listen to your breath, to your heart, to the silence that holds everything. And you smile, not because life is perfect, but because you didn't cling. And in that non-clinging, you lived. A day without attachment of the mind is not extraordinary. It's profoundly ordinary. That's the miracle. It's not about avoiding difficulty. It's about meeting it with spaciousness. It's about trusting the breath more than the thought. It's about choosing presence over story. You won't be able to do it every day. You're human. But even once you taste the lightness of non-attachment, you'll never forget. Because for one sacred day, you remembered who you were beneath all the noise, and that remembrance is the beginning of freedom. Change is inevitable. It moves through life like wind across a field, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, but always present. Seasons shift, bodies age, relationships evolve, and circumstances twist in directions we never expected. And yet, even knowing this, something inside us resists, not just occasionally, but deeply, habitually, almost reflexively. Why? What is it we're truly afraid of when things change on the surface? We may say we fear the unknown, instability, or loss of control. But beneath these answers, there's something more subtle of fear that's harder to name. It's the fear of losing the illusion that anything can stay the same. Because we cling to the familiar, even when it hurts. A woman named Alina once said, "I stayed in a job that made me miserable for years, not because I loved it, but because I knew it. It felt safe in its pain." This is the paradox. We would rather hold on to the discomfort we understand than step into a discomfort we don't. But why? Because change asks us to surrender control, to surrender identity, to surrender certainty. And for the mind, that feels like death. The ego is built on permanence, on defining who we are, what we own, what we believe. When change comes, it threatens those definitions. A relationship ends, a role disappears, a dream dissolves, and suddenly, we are left asking, if that's gone, then who am I now? Change doesn't just alter our circumstances, it challenges our sense of self. There's a story of a man named Samuel. He had built his identity around being a provider. His job, his income, his ability to support others. It was the foundation of how he saw himself. Then, unexpectedly, he lost his job. At first, he mourned the paycheck, but what crushed him more was the loss of meaning. "If I'm not useful," he said, "then what am I?" That's the quiet fear behind change, the fear of becoming no one. But here's the truth. We often miss change doesn't erase who we are. It reveals who we've always been beneath the roles, the routines, the narratives. It's not the self that dies in change. It's the story of the self. And maybe that's a gift. Imagine a tree losing its leaves in autumn. It doesn't panic. It doesn't try to glue them back on. It lets them fall because it trusts the cycle. It trusts that loss is not the end, but a beginning, wearing a different face. Can we live like that? Can we trust that what falls away might be making space for something deeper? Often, when things change, we feel groundless, like we're floating without anchor. But maybe that's not a problem. Maybe that's the invitation to stop anchoring in things that move and begin anchoring in awareness itself. Awareness doesn't fear change. It watches. It breathes. It allows. One breath in, one breath out. The rise and fall of everything. Alina eventually left her job. She didn't have a perfect plan, but she had presence, and that presence became her compass. I realized I wasn't afraid of not knowing. She said, I was afraid of not being someone others could label, but in letting go, I finally felt free. What if we saw change not as a threat, but as a teacher of humility reminding us we don't control the dance of life, a teacher of resilience showing us we can bend without breaking, a teacher of presence calling us to show up fully, because nothing is guaranteed. There's nothing wrong with fearing change. It's human, but we don't have to be ruled by that fear. We can meet change with curiosity. We can let go gently, like the tree. We can ask, what is this moment trying to show me that I could never learn in comfort? Because behind every change, there's a message. Life is not static. You are not static. And that's okay. It means you are alive. It means you are growing. And in that growth, something beautiful unfolds, not the kind of beauty we control, but the kind we discover when we finally stop clinging. So the next time change arrives, don't run, don't cling. Just pause, breathe, and listen. You may hear something ancient and kind whispering beneath the fear. This too belongs. You are not losing yourself. You are coming home. There is a soft truth that lives quietly beneath all storms. Everything passes. The joy, the sorrow, the chaos, the silence, like clouds drifting across the sky. No moment lasts forever. And perhaps, most importantly, pain, too, is temporary. But when we are in pain, this truth feels distant. Pain contracts time. It wraps itself around the heart and convinces us it will never leave. It whispers, this is who you are now. This is forever. And we believe it. We mistake intensity for permanence. But pain is not permanent. It is weather. And all weather changes. A man named Julian once told a story about the darkest year of his life. He had lost someone dear to him. The grief was immediate, but it was the silence after the funeral that truly hurt. I felt like I was underwater. He said, like the rest of the world had moved on. And I was frozen. In the moment, everything changed. He tried to push the pain away. He busied himself. He stayed distracted. But it always returned in the quiet, in the night, in the cracks between conversations. And then, one day, sitting alone in his kitchen, something shifted. He was crying again. But this time, he didn't try to stop it. He just breathed. He let the grief move through him like a river. He felt its weight, its ache, its depth, but he didn't resist. And slowly, the pain softened. It didn't disappear, but it changed. It became less of a wound and more of a presence, something that lived beside him, not within him. That was the beginning of healing. Because pain doesn't need to be erased. It needs to be met. We are taught to fear pain, to avoid it, to numb it, but avoidance only prolongs it. What we resist persists. What we welcome transforms. Meditation teaches us to sit with what is, not to fix, not to flee, but to feel with compassion. Imagine sitting beside a friend who is hurting. You don't tell them to hurry up and heal. You don't distract them. You stay. You listen. You hold space. This is how we must learn to sit with our own pain, with tenderness, with patience, with breath, because pain, when given space, becomes a teacher. It teaches us about impermanence, about what matters, about how deeply we can feel, about the strength we didn't know we had. Julian began to practice what he called grief sitting. Every morning, he would light a candle and sit quietly, not to meditate in the traditional sense, but to be with whatever arose. Some days it was sadness, other days, anger, some days, even laughter. But he let all of it pass through. And with each passing wave, he became more spacious inside. This is the power of presence. It doesn't remove pain, it holds it with grace. We often want pain to end quickly. But what if we shifted the question? What if we stopped asking, "When will this go away?" and started asking, "How can I be with this?" Gently. In that shift, we find freedom, because the truth is, even the deepest pain does not stay the same. It moves, it changes, it breathes, it passes, sometimes slowly, sometimes fiercely, but always, eventually, and in its passing, it leaves behind something precious, not scars, but softness, not trauma, but truth. Everything passes, even pain. Let that not be a reason to fear life, but a reason to meet it fully, to feel, to fall, to rise, to love. Because in the end, what makes pain bearable is not its absence, but our presence. We survive not by controlling life, but by allowing it. We heal not by forgetting pain, but by letting it move through us, like weather across the sky of our soul. So if you're hurting, pause, breathe, place a hand over your heart, and whisper gently, "This, too, will pass," because it will. And when it does, you will still be here, not broken, but more whole, in a quiet monastery nestled among the mountains of Kyoto. There lived an old Zen master named Haruki. His days were simple. He tended the garden, offered teachings to young monks, and drank tea every afternoon from the same delicate porcelain teacup. This cup was not ornate. It held no jewels or markings of prestige, but it was deeply precious to Haruki, not because of its beauty, but because of its story. The cup had been gifted to him by his own teacher many years ago. It had seen the turning of seasons, the passing of students, the silent hours of dawn meditation. It was, in its simplicity, a symbol of continuity. Every day, without fail, Haruki would drink from this cup, and every day, before lifting it to his lips, he would whisper a quiet phrase, This cup is already broken. The younger monks found this odd. They assumed it was a kind of ritual. Some thought it was pessimism. Others believed it was superstition. But one day, the cup slipped from Haruki's hands and shattered on the stone floor. There was silence, no gasp, no cry, no anger, just silence. Haruki looked at the pieces. Then he smiled softly and swept them into his palm. A monk nearby asked, "Master, how are you not upset? That cup was precious to you." Haruki replied, "Yes, and that is why I said each day it is already broken. I did not wait for it to shatter to begin letting go. I loved it fully, knowing it could not last. This is the wisdom of impermanence, to see the crack before it appears, to accept loss before it arrives, not as defeat, but as devotion. Because to truly cherish something is to recognize its fragility. We often live as if the people we love, the things we own, the identities we hold, will remain. We assume continuity. We build castles in sand, then panic when the tide comes. But Zen invites us to see differently, to love the cup, while knowing it is already broken, to hold the moment, while knowing it is already passing. This does not make us cold. It makes us more alive. When we remember impermanence, we stop sleepwalking through the miracle of now. We look our loved ones in the eyes and say what matters. We savor the taste of tea, knowing it will end. We walk under the autumn trees, not in grief for their falling leaves, but in awe of their surrender. One student, Aiko, asked Haruki many years later, "Master, if everything is already broken, why care at all?" Haruki smiled, "Because it is broken. I care more, not less. This is the paradox of impermanence. It teaches us not to detach, but to engage more deeply, not to fear loss, but to honor what is here while it is." Aiko would remember that lesson years later. As she sat beside her aging mother's hospital bed, the machines hummed, the silence was thick, and then, suddenly, she heard Haruki's voice in her memory. "This cup is already broken," and she held her mother's hand not in dread, but in full presence. Every squeeze, every breath, every word became sacred, because she no longer waited for the loss to begin, cherishing the connection. This is the invitation to stop postponing our love, our gratitude, our attention, to live with the awareness that everything is passing. And in that passing, there's profound beauty. We fear impermanence because we confuse it with emptiness. But impermanence is not void. It is vibrancy. It is the very thing that gives life its color. A painting is precious because it can fade. A song is sweet because it ends. A moment is sacred because it cannot last. Haruki continued drinking tea until the end of his life, but after that cup broke, he never replaced it with something equally delicate. Instead, he used a sturdy wooden cup, and every afternoon, he still whispered, "This cup is already broken," because it was never about the cup. It was about the awareness, the presence, the practice of letting go, not in despair, but in love. So when something breaks in your life, a plan, a heart, a dream, don't rush to fix it. Sit with it, honor it, breathe with it, and maybe whisper, "This, too, is already broken. And because of that, let me love it now." Nature never clings. It grows, it blooms, it falls, it renews. There's a quiet rhythm in the natural world, a constant movement that knows no resistance. No tree holds onto its leaves in autumn. No river tries to stop its own flow. No mountain resists the changing sky above it, and yet everything remains whole. What if we lived like that? What if, instead of gripping, we allowed instead of fearing endings, we flowed through them? The great teacher Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "Letting go gives us freedom, and freedom is the only condition for happiness." And nature, ever present, is a living embodiment of this freedom. In spring, the cherry trees blossom with a fierce, fragile beauty. Their flowers burst open, knowing they will not last. For a few short days, petals fall like snow, carpeting the ground in pink and white, and then they are gone. But the tree does not mourn. It does not question the brevity of its glory. It simply offers what it has, and when the time comes, it releases. This is the first lesson of nature: give fully, and then let go. A woman named Claire once visited a forest during early autumn. Her life had been full of endings: a divorce, the closing of a beloved cafe, the loss of a friend. She had come seeking escape, but instead, she found trees. Everywhere she walked, leaves were falling, gently, without resistance, without drama. She stood beneath a great maple and watched a single golden leaf detach from a high branch and spiral to the earth. It was so quiet, she said later, so peaceful. It didn't fall like it was dying. It fell like it was returning. This is the second lesson of nature. Letting go is not always a loss. It can be a return to what's essential, a return to rest, a return to truth. We often resist letting go because we equate it with failure or abandonment. But nature doesn't see letting go as giving up. It sees it as the next part of the cycle. The river lets go of each bend. The moon lets go of each phase. The bird lets go of the branch to fly. Letting go is how nature moves forward, how it adapts, how it survives. So why do we struggle so much? Perhaps because we've forgotten we are nature. 2, we've built our lives around permanence jobs, roles, relationships, plans. And when life shifts, we grasp, we panic, we build walls. But the tree doesn't wall itself off when winter comes. It turns inward. It conserves. It rests. Claire sat under that maple for hours, watching the leaves fall, and something in her heart began to soften. She realized she didn't have to fix everything. She didn't have to know the next chapter. She just had to allow this one to close, like the tree, allowing its branches to bear. Letting go isn't passive. It's active surrender. It's trusting the wisdom of release. Another lesson from nature roots. Even as the tree sheds its leaves, it deepens its roots. Letting go on the surface doesn't mean losing depth. In fact, it often makes room for it. We clear what no longer serves so that what truly matters can take root. So let go like the tree, not in bitterness, but in trust. Not in fear, but in rhythm. Watch the waves. They rise. They fall. Not one of them fights the shore. Watch the wind. It moves between branches, never asking permission. Even the stars let go of light across galaxies, never knowing where it will land. And still, everything belongs. Claire returned from the forest different, not because her problems were solved, but because her relationship to them had changed. I began to see my life as a season. She said, and seasons don't apologize for shifting. Let that be your mantra. Seasons don't apologize. Your grief is a season. Your joy is a season. Your uncertainty is a season. And like all seasons, they pass. You don't have to hold forever. You don't have to hold at all. You can place it down, like the leaf, like the petal, like the tide, because letting go is not the end of the story. It is the space that allows the next chapter to begin. Letting go is often misunderstood. We hear the words and imagine detachment, coldness, a walking away from what matters. We confuse release with rejection. But true letting go is not abandonment. It is an act of deep love, of wisdom, of compassion that no longer clings. To let go of emotion does not mean to push it aside or to numb it. It means to feel it fully, to honor it, and then to release it when it has spoken its truth. There is a woman named Sora who lost her partner after a long illness. In the months following, she heard many versions of the phrase, "You have to let go." Friends said it with kindness. Counselors said it with hope. But each time, it stung. It felt like they wanted me to move on. She said, "To forget." But I didn't want to forget. Sora thought letting go meant forgetting love. So she clung to the grief not because it felt good, but because it was proof that the love had been real. But love doesn't live in pain. Love lives in presence, and presence doesn't cling. Eventually, through long hours of silence and slow walks under the trees, Sora began to understand. Letting go didn't mean erasing memory. It didn't mean denying sorrow. It meant making space for joy to return. 2, it meant carrying the love, but not the ache. Because love is not pain, and pain, when held too tightly, becomes its own cage. We think if we stop grieving, we betray the past. But often, what we're really betraying is the future, the possibility of peace, of light, of breath. Letting go is not abandonment. It's alignment with life, with change, with truth. Another story, this one about a father named Ben and his son, Luca. Luca struggled with addiction for years. Ben tried everything: support, therapy, boundaries, rescue, but nothing seemed to change. Each relapse broke him open again. Finally, a counselor said, "You may need to let go." Ben recoiled. "He's my son. I can't give up on him." But letting go isn't giving up. It's giving back responsibility. It's trusting the other person's journey even when it hurts. So, Ben shifted. He stopped trying to fix. He stopped trying to save. He loved without controlling. He began to say, "I'm here. I trust your path, even if I don't understand it." And in that space, something changed. Luca began to rise, because sometimes our grip is what keeps others from standing on their own. Letting go is not abandonment. It's respect. It's humility. It's saying, "I cannot carry this for you, but I will walk beside you." It's one of the hardest forms of love because it asks us to feel everything and still open our hands. When we cling to emotion, be it grief, anger, regret, we shrink. We become defined by that feeling. But we are not our feelings. We are the sky that holds them. Letting go is remembering we are the sky. The feelings can pass. They can rain. They can storm. But we remain. You do not abandon your truth by releasing your grip on pain. You honor your truth by meeting it with breath, with spaciousness, with kindness. A man named Tao once said, I used to think my anger gave me power. Then I realized it was just protecting my wound. Letting go of that anger didn't mean forgetting what hurt him. It meant allowing healing to begin. Because emotions are messengers, not prisons. We listen, we learn, and when their message is complete, we let them go. Just like leaves fall, just like waves recede, just like the wind moves on. Letting go is not absence. It is presence without possession. It is love without fear. It is living with an open palm. And in that openness, something beautiful happens. We feel more, not less. More alive, more present, more capable of meeting life as it is. So the next time you hear, let it go. Don't hear abandonment. Hear freedom. Not from caring, but from clinging. Not from feeling, but from drowning. Not from loving, but from losing yourself in the storm. Letting go is not the end of love. It's the beginning of a truer, lighter, freer love, one that flows, one that breathes, one that stays, not because it must, but because it chooses to. Loss is a teacher no one invites, yet everyone meets. It arrives quietly, sometimes suddenly, sometimes with the slow ache of time. It reshapes everything. The room feels different, the air heavier, the hours longer. What was once familiar becomes foreign. But in this space of absence, something else begins to emerge. Not comfort, not clarity, but a fragile kind of truth. Personal loss strips away illusions. It shows us what matters. It asks, who are you? Now that this is gone, there's a story about a man named Elias. He was a school teacher, a father of 2, and a husband for nearly 25 years. His wife, Maya, passed away unexpectedly from a heart condition. No warnings, no time for goodbyes. One morning, she was there. That night, she wasn't. For weeks, Elias wandered through his home like a ghost. He didn't touch her books. Her shoes stayed by the door. Her scent lingered in the hallway, in the pillow. He wasn't ready, and he didn't pretend to be. Friends tried to comfort him. She's in a better place. Time will heal. But the words, though well meant, felt like blankets thrown over a fire they muffled, but did not soothe. One morning, Elias sat at the kitchen table, where she used to pour his tea. The chair across from him sat empty, and for the first time, instead of turning away from that emptiness, he faced it. He looked at the chair, and he cried. But it was a different kind of cry. It wasn't resistance. It was surrender. He wasn't crying for her return. He was crying because he had loved deeply, and that love had changed form. Loss, when we stop resisting it, reveals the depth of our connection. It is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It's a sign that something was real. Something mattered. And what mattered still lives, just not in the way we knew. Elias began a new ritual. Each morning, he would write a letter to Maya, not out of grief, but out of presence. He would tell her about the children, the flowers blooming in the yard, the dreams he had. It was not about holding on. It was about keeping the heart open. I realized, he said, that grief is not the end of love. It's its continuation, in a different language. This is one of the most profound lessons of personal loss. It doesn't close love. It expands it. It shows us the depth of our capacity to feel, to care, to remember, and it humbles us because we are not in control. We cannot predict how long we will have with anyone. We cannot freeze time, but we can be present. We can say what needs to be said. We can live with fewer regrets. Loss teaches urgency, not the urgency of rushing, but the urgency of sincerity. Say, I love you. Say, I'm sorry. Say, I'm here. Say it now, because you never know when the chair across the table will be empty. Loss also teaches us about impermanence. We hear the word often in spiritual teachings, but to experience it through the quiet ache of absence is something else. Impermanence is no longer an idea. It becomes a companion. But not all loss is through death. Sometimes we lose friendships, homes, health, identities. Each kind of loss holds its own sorrow, its own lesson. When Elias retired from teaching years after Maya's death, he faced another loss, the sense of purpose that had once defined him. I had thought my grief was only for Maya, he reflected, but I began to grieve the version of myself that no longer existed. This is another layer of loss, the loss of who we thought we were. But maybe that, too, is grace, because in losing those versions of ourselves, we come closer to something essential, something unnameable. Call it soul. Call it awareness. Call it peace. It's what remains when the identities fall away. In his quiet days after retirement, Elias began painting, not to become an artist, just to express, just to feel. Each brushstroke was a kind of prayer, a remembrance. He said, "Loss taught me to see beauty where I never looked before, in silence, in slowness, in the simple act of being." Personal loss, when met with presence, transforms us, not into who we were before, but into someone softer, more open, more real. It doesn't make life easier, but it makes life deeper. So, when loss comes, and it will, don't rush through it. Sit with it. Let it teach you. Let it unravel what no longer serves. Let it open what was once closed. And in time, you will find that the pain doesn't disappear. It integrates. It becomes part of your breath, not as weight, but as wisdom. You carry those you've lost, not in your arms, but in your choices, in your kindness, in your stillness, in your courage to love again. Because loss is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a deeper one, the one where you learn to live not despite what's missing, but because of what remains. We spend our lives searching for meaning, for purpose, for love, for success. We chase the next answer, the next step, the next version of ourselves. Somewhere along the way, we absorb the message that who we are is not yet enough, that peace is somewhere out there, waiting to be found. But what if the search is the very thing keeping us from what we long for? What if the deepest truth is this: there's nothing more to seek, only to return. Return not to the past, not to old habits, but to the quiet, untouched presence that has been with us all along, to the breath, to the awareness behind every thought, to the gentle center of being that asks for nothing and yet holds everything. There is a story of a man named Kai who spent years climbing spiritual mountains. He read countless books, attended retreats in distant lands, meditated in silence for weeks. And yet, a restlessness lingered, a sense that something was still missing. One evening, during a particularly long meditation, He opened his eyes and looked at a single candle flickering in the dark. In that moment, something shifted, not because of the technique, not because of effort, but because he stopped reaching. I realized I had been sitting on top of what I was trying to find. He said, all the seeking had taken me further from the simplicity of just being. This is the paradox. The more we strive, the further we drift from the stillness that's already here. The more we search for enlightenment, the more we miss the sacredness of this very breath. Returning is not an act of addition. It is subtraction. It is the quiet shedding of illusions, of roles, of stories that tell us we are incomplete. In Zen, there is a saying before enlightenment: chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Nothing changes, and yet everything does. Because the mind is no longer scattered in seeking, it has come home. Returning is not a resignation. It is a remembrance that we are not the noise in our heads. We are the space that holds the noise. We are not the emotions. We are the one who feels. We are not the striving. We are the presence that watches it all. There was a woman named Amara who once said, I thought healing was about fixing myself, but then I learned it was about remembering I was never broken. She had spent years in therapy, trying to solve her pain, and while it helped, she found deeper peace not in answers, but in allowing, in presence, in resting, not escaping. That is what returning offers. Not escape, but rest. Not perfection, but wholeness. To return is to sit in the middle of the storm and remember you are the sky. It is to walk into the noise of life and remember silence lives within you. It is to look in the mirror, past the eyes, and say, I am here. I am enough. Not because you achieved something, but because you stopped running. We have been conditioned to chase better careers, better versions of ourselves, better futures. But every time we arrive, the mind moves the finish line, and so we run again. But peace is not a finish line. It is a pause. It is a breath taken fully. It is the moment you stop and realize you are already home. Returning is not about going back to who you were. It's about becoming more of who you truly are. Beneath the fears, beneath the striving, beneath the masks. Kai eventually gave away most of his spiritual books, not out of bitterness, but gratitude. They led me to the door, he said, but it was silence that opened it. Let that silence speak. Let it guide you not forward, but inward, to the still point where nothing is missing, where nothing needs fixing, where you simply are, and in that being, everything begins again. Not with noise, but with breath. Not with effort, but with ease. Not with seeking, but with returning, again and again, until the return becomes your way of living. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of everything that matters. We live in a world saturated with noise notifications, opinions, instructions, distractions. Even our inner dialogue becomes loud, filled with worries, judgments, and questions. And in this endless stream, we forget that the truest part of us is not found in what we say, but in what remains when nothing is said. Silence is not an empty space. It is the space where we finally hear ourselves. There's a story about a woman named Mara. She was a musician, a cellist who had played in concert halls across the world. For years, her life was measured in crescendos and applause, but somewhere along the way, something shifted. The music began to feel like performance, not presence. So one winter, Mara took a sabbatical. She traveled to a remote village near the mountains, far from stages, far from audiences. She carried no cello, just herself and a journal. The first few days were restless. Her mind buzzed with ideas, regrets, questions. But slowly, in the stillness of the snow-covered forest, a different rhythm emerged. She would sit on a bench every morning and listen not to the world, but to the silence beneath it. And in that silence, she heard herself again, not the performer, not the achiever, just the being. Silence is not just the absence of external sound. It is the return to internal clarity. It is where confusion settles and truth arises, where masks dissolve and presence remains. We often avoid silence because it feels uncomfortable. It confronts us with what we've ignored. But that discomfort is not punishment. It's the beginning of healing. To return through silence is to stop explaining, to stop running, to stop proving. It is to sit in the quiet and say, I am enough, even without words. There is a Zen saying, silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation. In silence, we remember. We remember that the breath is sacred, that the moment is holy, that awareness itself is the teacher. Mara began playing again, but not in concert halls. She played for the trees, for the sky, for herself, and the music that emerged was no longer performance. It was prayer, because silence had given her back her source. Let silence do the same for you. You don't need a forest. You don't need weeks alone. You only need to pause, to turn inward, to listen. Even 5 minutes of silence each day can become a portal, a return to your center. Sit, close your eyes, feel your breath. Let the noise rise and fall. Let the mind chatter. Then quiet. Don't resist. Just witness. Beneath the thoughts, beneath the stories, silence waits. It always has. Silence is not something you create. It's something you remember. It's who you were before the world told you who to be. In silence, we are whole. In silence, we return. Return to the heart. Return to presence. Return to truth. So when the world is loud, pause. When the heart is heavy, pause. When you forget who you are, pause. And let silence lead you home, because it will. Every time, stillness is not something we achieve. It is something we uncover, like a lake buried beneath layers of fallen leaves, ripples, and passing storms. Stillness is always there, waiting. It does not disappear. It only becomes harder to see when our lives become noisy, busy, full of striving and distraction. But beneath it all, stillness remains. There was a man named Theo, a corporate executive who spent most of his life in airports, meetings, deadlines, and deals. Success came, yes, but peace did not. There was always something else to do, somewhere else to be. Even during vacations, his mind would race with emails and projects. One day, at the insistence of a friend, Theo attended a meditation retreat. He expected boredom, maybe some relaxation. What he found was silence, and at first, it unnerved him. He had grown used to motion. Silence felt like standing still in a world that never stopped. But on the third morning, something changed. He was sitting under a tree, eyes closed, the morning sun warming his skin. And suddenly, the noise in his head paused. No great insight, no vision, just space. A space so quiet, it startled him. He opened his eyes, but the stillness stayed. It wasn't around him, it was within. That moment changed everything. Theo described it later as a homecoming I didn't know I'd been longing for. He realized that the peace he had been chasing through status, income, recognition had always been with him, hidden beneath the noise. Stillness is not passive. It is profoundly alive. It listens when the world speaks too loudly. It watches when the mind runs in circles. It waits not impatiently, but faithfully for us to return. Stillness is the part of you that was never wounded, the part that remains untouched by loss, unshaken by success, unmoved by fear. It is not distant or mystical. It is as close as your next breath, as near as the beat of your heart. But we forget. We get caught in the current of doing. We forget we are beings. And being is not frantic. It is still. There's a story of a woman named Layla. She was a nurse working night shifts in a busy hospital. Her days were filled with alarms, emergencies, and sorrow. The weight of suffering sometimes felt unbearable. She didn't have time for long retreats or deep study. But she found her own doorway to stillness. Every night, before her shift, she would sit in her car for 5 minutes. She would close her eyes, place a hand on her heart, and simply breathe. No technique, no expectation, just breath, just being. And in that space, no matter how chaotic her day had been, something settled. The storm slowed, the heart softened, the stillness returned. I couldn't change the pain around me, she said, but I learned not to carry it in my bones. This is the gift of stillness. It doesn't erase life's turbulence. It gives you a deeper place to stand within it, a center that doesn't sway with every wave, a quiet that speaks louder than fear. We think we need to retreat from life to find stillness. But life is not the problem. Our forgetting is. We don't need more peace. We need to remember the peace that's already here. Like sunlight hidden behind clouds, it has never left. It simply waits. Stillness is not something you must earn. You are worthy of it now, in the middle of your busy day, in the messiness of your thoughts, in the confusion of your journey. Stillness is not the end of the path. It is the ground beneath every step. The more we return to it, the less we cling to what changes, the more we rest in it, the more we trust what is. Stillness teaches us that we are not broken. We are simply distracted, and distraction can be forgiven. You do not need to become someone else. You only need to return to who you've always been, in the stillness, where you are enough, where you are whole, where you are home. There was once a young man named Jun, just 23, living in a fast city. Everything in his life was moving: his studies, his part-time job, his social feed, his mind. He was praised for being on top of things, but inside, he felt like he was drowning beneath them. One day, exhausted after a particularly overwhelming week, he stumbled upon a small Zen center tucked between tall buildings. It was quiet, unassuming. The sign outside read, "Come in, sit down, be still." Something about those words so simple, so firm, pulled at him. Jun walked inside. The room was bare wooden floors, cushions, a single vase with a white lily. A gentle-faced teacher greeted him, said nothing more than, "Sit if you'd like." So he sat. For the first few minutes, all he felt was the pressure to perform. Was he doing it right? Was he breathing correctly? Should he close his eyes or keep them open? But then something happened. Nothing. No one asked anything of him. No notifications, no tasks, just silence, just space. That evening, Jun didn't feel transformed, but he felt a little more here. He returned the next day, and the next. Eventually, he asked the teacher if he could spend a full day at the center, just one day to slow down. He said. The teacher nodded. Go slow, very slow. No goals, just presence. Jun's day began at sunrise. He woke not to an alarm, but to the soft rustling of wind through the trees. He sat by the window, letting the light spill onto his face, and for the first time in months, didn't check his phone. He went to the kitchen, made tea slowly, boiled the water with attention, held the cup with both hands, felt the heat, smelled the steam, sipped. No scrolling, no multitasking, just tea. Then he walked outside. Each step was deliberate. He noticed the feel of the earth beneath his feet, the texture of bark on trees, the dance of shadows across stone. The day moved not in tasks, but in breaths. He ate mindfully. He sat in quiet. He journaled. He cried. He napped. He breathed. Jun thought slowing down would be boring, but instead, it was overwhelming in the most beautiful way. He began to feel everything again. The tightness in his chest he'd been ignoring, the fatigue in his bones, the small joys a bird call, the crack of a twig, the warmth of sunlight on his neck. He realized that in speeding through life, he'd missed life itself. That presence wasn't a luxury, it was a lifeline. As the sun began to set, he sat again on the cushion. His mind wandered, of course, but he kept returning to the breath, to the body, to now. When the teacher joined him later, he asked, "What did you learn today?" Jun paused, then said softly, "That I don't have to run." The teacher smiled. "You never did." That night, Jun didn't post about his experience. He didn't text anyone about how amazing his day was. He simply went to bed, not as a student, not as an achiever, just as Jun, full, present, enough. From that day on, once a week, he chose to live slowly, no commitments, no noise, just return. And over time, those slow days began to spill into the fast ones, a breath in traffic, a pause before replying, a smile while washing dishes. Slowness wasn't a technique. It was a homecoming. It didn't change the world. It changed how he met the world. And that changed everything. There is a kind of joy that does not arrive with achievement. It does not wait for everything to be perfect. It does not knock loudly on the door of your greatest successes. It does not demand an audience, a celebration, or even a reason. This joy is quiet. It rises from the simplest things: the smell of warm rice, the sound of wind through leaves, the smile of a stranger, the light hitting the floor just so. This is the joy that needs no condition. It is not reserved for special moments. It is the moment. And yet, many people spend their lives postponing joy, waiting for the right job, the right partner, the right body, the right future. They treat happiness like a reward rather than a presence, a prize, not a practice. But life doesn't wait, and neither does true joy. There was once a man named Aaron. He worked at a small bookstore tucked away in a quiet alley. He made little money. He had no great ambitions. Yet those who entered the shop always remembered him. Why? Because Aaron smiled not out of obligation, but out of presence. He greeted each customer like an old friend. He dusted the shelves with care. He brewed tea in the back room and often offered a cup to anyone who lingered too long in the poetry section. People would leave feeling lighter, as if touched by something they couldn't name. When asked about his secret, Aaron would shrug and say, "I enjoy what I do. I enjoy being here." Not because the bookstore was extraordinary, but because he was fully in it. He once said, "Joy doesn't come from big things. It comes from seeing small things clearly." That's what simplicity offers us: clarity. In simplicity, we see what's always been enough. The breath, the sky, the hands that hold, the feet that walk, the silence between words. There's a story in Zen about a monk who asked his master, "What is enlightenment?" The master replied, "When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep." It sounds too simple, but perhaps that's the point. We complicate happiness. We wrap it in expectations. But real joy often hides in the ordinary. The monk Thay once taught his students to eat a tangerine slowly, to feel its texture, smell its skin, taste each segment fully. And then he said, "This is a miracle to be alive and eat a tangerine. How many such miracles pass us by every day? We rush through breakfast, barely tasting. We walk to work, staring at our phones. We forget the warmth of sunlight on skin, the comfort of clean clothes, the magic of a deep breath. But simplicity is an invitation. It whispers, 'Slow down. Look again.' This moment, just as it is, contains joy. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is real." A woman named Anya began keeping a joy journal, but instead of listing accomplishments, she wrote down small joys from each day. Monday, the smell of cinnamon. Tuesday, a stranger held the door. Wednesday, my cat blinked at me slowly. Thursday, I laughed at a silly mistake. Friday, the rain made music on the roof. After months, she said, I realized my life wasn't lacking joy. I was just missing it. We don't need more to be happy. We need less clutter, less rushing, less comparison. Because underneath all of that, the joy has always been there, like a still lake beneath fog, waiting to be seen. This joy doesn't ask you to change. It asks you to notice. And the more you notice, the more it grows. You start finding beauty in the chipped cup, in the crooked smile, in the quiet mornings. You start realizing that joy doesn't arrive. It's revealed. It is not created by circumstances, but uncovered by awareness. And the gateway to awareness is simplicity. The more we let go of what we think we need, the more we find what's already here. Simplicity teaches us that joy is not conditional. It is elemental. It is breath, sunlight, kindness, laughter, stillness. It is this, whatever this is, if met with open eyes and a quiet heart. Aaron, the bookseller, passed away in his late 70s. at his funeral. People from all walks of life came: writers, children, travelers, old friends, brief customers who'd only visited once but never forgot him. One person said, "He didn't do anything extraordinary. He just lived his life beautifully." And in that beauty, joy flourished, not because he chased it, but because he lived simply and saw clearly. May we do the same. There is a question that lives beneath all other questions. It is not about what we want, or what we fear, or even what we believe. It is more quiet, more intimate, more profound. It is the question who is aware of this. Not just who am I, which the mind tries to answer with identity and memory, but who is noticing, who is hearing these words, who is watching the thoughts rise and fall, who is feeling the breath, who is seeing the seeing. It's a question that has no answer in words, only a shift in perception. This question doesn't want you to think, it wants you to look. Not outward, but inward, and then deeper. There was once a young seeker named Ravi. He had studied with many teachers, read countless scriptures, and mastered philosophical debates. But despite all his knowledge, he felt restless. Something remained unsettled when he visited a quiet teacher named Kavi. Kavi offered him no teachings, no lectures. Instead, he asked just one question: who is the one aware of all this? Ravi responded quickly, "Me, of course." Kavi smiled. "Who is me? Can you find it?" Ravi began to speak again, but Kavi raised a hand gently. "Don't answer with thought," he said. "Just look." So Ravi sat. For hours, he watched thoughts arise: memories, images, self-concepts. But none of them were him. They were seen, observed, transient. But the one seeing remained, still, silent, unchanging. He couldn't grasp it, and yet he knew it was there. The awareness, the witness, the presence, behind all that moved. In that moment, Ravi understood something not with his mind, but with his being. He was not the content of experience. He was the space in which it appeared. This is the heart of many meditative traditions, not to become someone, but to see what has always been here, to recognize that behind the drama, behind the roles, behind even the personality, there is something watching, always watching, not judging, not controlling, just aware. And that awareness is not separate from peace. It is peace, because awareness does not cling. It does not resist. It does not fear. It simply is. When we live from identification with our roles, our thoughts, our emotions, we suffer. We contract. We ride the waves of every passing moment. But when we begin to rest in awareness, something shifts. We are still in the world, but not trapped by it. We feel emotions, but we are not owned by them. We think, but we are not the thinker. We act, but we are not the actor. We become the space in which life unfolds, and that space is free. It is open. It is silent. It is home. A woman named Lena once shared her experience of grief after losing her child. For months, she was consumed by memories, by sorrow, by guilt. But one evening, sitting alone in the garden, she began to watch, not the flowers, not the sky, but her own pain. She watched without judgment, without trying to change it. She became aware of the ache not as a victim, but as a witness. And in that witnessing, something softened. The The pain didn't vanish, but she was no longer drowning. She said, "I realized that behind my grief was something that didn't break. A stillness, a presence. It was like the sky behind a storm. That's awareness. It doesn't fix the storm. It holds it. And in that holding, healing begins. So return to the question, again and again. When life feels heavy, ask who is aware of this heaviness. When thoughts rush like a river, ask who is watching the river. When joy fills the heart, ask who feels this joy, not to analyze, but to return to the center, to the source, to the one who never left. The final question is not one to answer. It is one to live, in silence, in stillness, in presence, until even the question dissolves, and only awareness remains, whole, timeless, here, now, you. We have walked together through stories, through silence, through stillness, from the restless seeking of the mind to the quiet wisdom of the heart, from the weight of emotions to the freedom of presence, from the noise of the world to the peace that has always been here, waiting within. What you have explored is not a philosophy to memorize. It is a path to return to again and again. In the stillness of breath, in the pause before you speak, in the noticing of sunlight through your window, you've seen that mindfulness is not something to achieve. It is something to remember. You've seen that letting go is not loss. It is liberation. That impermanence is not punishment. It is the rhythm of life itself. That meditation is not escape. It is deep arrival. And in the end, the journey is not about becoming something more. It's about being fully who you already are. Not the version shaped by pressure, by stories, by fear, but the awareness behind it all. The quiet knowing, the spacious presence, the home you never truly left. In this space, joy is no longer a reward. It becomes a companion. Peace is not a destination. It becomes your resting place. And love, no longer clinging or controlling, becomes spacious and free. So now, take a moment. Gently close your eyes. Inhale. Exhale. Feel this breath as it is. Feel this body as it is. Feel this life as it is. Nothing to fix. Nothing to chase. Only this. Only now. Only you, as awareness, present and whole. And if this video has opened even a small doorway back to yourself, then let that door stay open. Let your days be touched by slowness, by presence, by gratitude. You don't need grand gestures, just a return to the simple, the silent, the sacred. If this message resonates with you, please support this channel. Like the video. Leave a comment sharing your own experience of presence. Subscribe for more content to nourish your heart. And most importantly, return. Always return. Because peace is not far. It is within. And it has been waiting for you. Welcome home.